All right, all right, all right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Or no, I guess it's now good afternoon. Sorry. It's a problem of starting a meeting right at noon. It really confuses things, but thank you all for joining us here at the 2026 CCOC budget training. It is great to see everybody's faces here in the room. That is one of the things that I think after COVID, I think I missed the most was being able to see people in trainings and be able to actually have an interactive session that is not over a screen. So, well, my name is Jason Welty. I'm the Executive Director of CCOC. I am going to kick us off here today and talk a little bit about, so I'm going to do these opening remarks and welcome. So, the CCOC, we are the statutorily created, as you all know, entity that does everything related to budget, performance measures, and training for the clerks statewide as it relates to their court-operated operations. As I said, I'm Jason Welty. I'm the Executive Director. Also with me here today is Griffin Kolchakian, who is our Budget and Communications Director, Leonard Carper, who is our Data Quality Officer, as well as Lindsay Buck, our Education Coordinator. And unfortunately, Gracie Jenkins is not here with us today because she had a slip and fall and she is recovering. So I'm going to luckily, Gracie was going to talk about the legislative stuff. So luckily I have a little bit of knowledge of that. So I'm going to take Gracie's place when the time comes later today. So again, CCOC, we are budget, performance, education. Those are our three primary statutory obligations as I see it, in terms of all three of these things are designed to help support the clerks. So everything that we do budget-wise is designed to help support the clerks in everything that they do. We then monitor the performance of how you're doing with that budget that we provide for you. And then when there are opportunities and when there are gaps and when there are things that you don't know that you should know, we are there to help educate you on everything that it relates to, as far as education is concerned. So we want to be that support for you. And this is kind of this is the three tiers. As you know, internally we talk about this a lot from when we're talking about how we need to be outwardly focused and what we need to be doing to help support clerks. These are the things that we're looking at. And for many of you that are in this room, that you know, obviously today is a budget training, but you also know that we are working on modifying the performance measures to make them things that are actually useful in measuring. And then we are also kicking off an expanded education process where we are actually doing a lot more training, such as this one here through CCOC. So I will actually just kind of stop there and turn it over to Mr. Griffin here and let him talk about today's training. But thank you again. There are, for those of you who didn't get a chance to eat lunch, there's some snacks and stuff over there, or if you just get hungry through the afternoon and you just want to graze a little bit, we've got some sandwiches and fruit and coffee and tea and whatnot. So feel free to just graze at your will. So, Mr. Griffin.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CCOC interactive budget training. We made it a point to say interactive 200 to 300 times in all the emails and surveys and PowerPoints that you'll see here today, because we do want this to be interactive. If you have any questions, please yell it out, raise your hand, whatever you want to do, but please stop us today and let us know, because that is the whole point of why we're here, is try to answer all of your questions. And thank you in advance for taking the time to fill out the survey that we sent out. We tried to add in and hopefully answer every question that you all and everyone else in the state asked. So we tried to incorporate that and make sure that we answered that, as well as just throughout the budget process, answering phone calls and emails from clerks and staff. We try to compile some of those frequently asked questions and incorporate them here today. So again, as Jason said, thank you so much for traveling near and far and joining us here today. Today, we are going to go over the budget development process specifically for the court-related budget. That's probably one of the most frequently asked questions we get is, what goes into our budget? How does the budget committee and the council, how do they determine our budget? Why does it not go up as much as we requested? So just a general overview of that process today, as well as the related reports that we have, right? You know, CCOC, I'm sure, as you know, you send us many, many, many reports. Well, you send Leonard many, many reports throughout the year. So an overview of a question we get: why are we sending you this report? Why are we completing it? Why are we taking time out of our required duties to fill out these reports? So we'll dive into that. Leonard will go over what happens once the reports leave your email and come into ours, what that looks like, the questions that you get from us, and stuff like that on the reports. Also, the revenue and REC update, revenue estimating conference. We use a lot of acronyms, but that has been something that has really been brought to the forefront in a lot of the budget committees in the past few years. So we'll go over that in detail today. Also, case weights. Is anyone here involved in any of the many, many meetings that we've had recently for the case weights? Okay, a few people. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I know that's, how many are we up to, Lindsay? Like 40 or 50 meetings so far? Close. So, but we are revamping that, so we'll dive into the case weights. And then lastly, budget issues facing the clerks, and specifically some legislative stuff that's also happening downtown right now. And as Jason said, please help yourself. We know it's a noon budget and revenue training, so hopefully we have enough coffee. But we're going to start off first with a dad joke. What do you call a belt full of watches? You get extra $1 million in your budget if you get this one right. A waste of time. I'm a newer dad, so the jokes will get better. But hopefully you won't find today that today is not a waste of time and it's worthwhile. So to begin, let's jump into the court-related budget development process. As everyone here knows way better than we do, the clerks have many, many, many duties and responsibilities. I think the framework is how many lines? A couple thousand lines of duties and responsibilities that play a very important role in the state's judicial system. So how do we fund what we do? This is a look at one of our budget committee meetings. But all of these terms you'll hear throughout the year, throughout budget committee meetings, throughout council meetings, a ton of different terms, acronyms, names for different budgets and processes. So we've tried to use the same one, streamline some things, make it make sense. But that is, again, a ton of the questions we get are, what does this term mean? How is the total requested budget different from the revenue limited budget, different from the needs-based budget? So a lot of different terms that we throw out, so hopefully we can bring a little clarity to that as well. So again, like we said, CCOC oversees the court-related budget. So again, just a small piece of your office, or not a small piece, but a portion of your office. So complicated as our process is, it's not even your full office's budget. So that's just a whole nother added component that we have. Some things we have on the county fiscal year, some things we have on the state fiscal year, and then obviously the federal fiscal year, which is the same as the county. So a lot of complicated moving parts that all piece together and make up what is our budget. So, but again, today we'll focus on just the court-related budget because that's what's under the CCOC purview. So our budget development process that we do starting in January, February, that goes all the way through August, sometimes September, leading into October 1st. Our budget development process mirrors the state budgeting process. And there's two main benefits for that. One, it's something that Jason kind of brought years ago. One, it kind of brought a uniformity to our process, streamlined a lot of what we did. But more importantly, It also allowed us to be able to talk to the legislature, the House, the Senate, the governor's office in a language that they understand, right? Because unfortunately, or fortunately, that's where we have to go for additional funding, for more revenue, for revenue redirects, for more jury funding that we need. So being able to, kind of relay our budget process and our budget needs in a language and a process that they understand has really been beneficial. So some of those things include a base budget. We establish a base budget each year, which we'll dive into in a little bit, but also the budget issue requests that are due in a few weeks. That mirrors the state's LBR process, or legislative budget request process. So each agency, department across the state each year submits to the governor's office, the House and Senate, their budget requests, similar to what all of your offices do. And they do not get 100% of their request. A few other points on this are there's no extra budget. So the budget committee and the executive council allocates 100% of the available budget. So that is why we try to kind of reiterate throughout the year, especially as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, there's not any budget left where if you fully expend your budget through 10 months, we don't have a magic pot of money that we can send you to help out. So once we allocate the revenue limited budget, at least from the CCOC standpoint, that is all we have. But that does not factor in, recording dollars, public records, mod funds, stuff like that. So, but there is no extra budget. As a lot of you know, unfortunately, some of our offices statewide are subsidized by the county out of necessity. We're underfunded. And so a lot of times we have to turn to the board to help, fill in some gaps and cover some things that our courtside budget does not cover, unfortunately. And also 90% of our costs, I think it's up to 94% of our actual costs are people. Our offices are people. So that makes it easy in some ways, but also that presents some challenges. So I'm a very visual person. So in my mind, the clerk's budget is a pie. So there's a finite pie that we have. And this year, the total court-related budget for the clerks is $544.2 million. So again, that's what we have. Unfortunately, we cannot, if our needs exceed that, our expenditures can't. So we have to have cash to spend every dollar of budget. So our budget, max budget, is $544.2 million. And so that's what the committee and council allocated this year. So in that, the budget committee's main duty and responsibility is to figure out, okay, what is each clerk's fair share of that total pie, right? We have to divide that pie 67 different ways statewide. How does the committee do that? And what goes into that? And that's where case weights will come into play a little later, and some other things that the committee considers throughout the year. And then the legislative side of the house is, how do we increase that total pie, right? That pie has increased a great deal over the past few years. And so with the great work that the legislative team is doing, Clerk Fernandez-Barquin here has played a huge role in helping increase that pie. So again, but as always, each year we look to ways to increase that even more. Any questions so far? All right. So how do we determine what goes into that pie? So we turn to Florida statute 2835, which oversees the CCOC, and more importantly, how we are able to determine the clerk's courtside budget. So the first line is the Revenue Estimating Conference, REC. But each July is when they set our official budget for the year of what they project that all clerks statewide will collect. So that's the main driver of our total amount that we're allowed to build the court-related budget. On top of that, now we can add in the unspent budgeted funds from the previous fiscal year. So through our settle-up process, we are able to calculate all 67 clerks' unspent budgeted funds if there are any, and we can then roll that into that next year's budget on top of the REC projection, as well as the cumulative excess. So I'm sure if you've listened to any of the legislative calls recently, you have heard the term cumulative excess of revenue. That is something else that we can add. And previously, I believe it was 2019, we were able to pass a bill that we could keep 50% of the cumulative excess. The other 50 was remitted to the state general revenue fund. So anything that we collect over our REC budget for the prior year, we used to send 100% back to the state. Then as of 2019, we sent 50%. As of this year, House Bill 925 is currently sitting on the governor's desk. If he signs that, we will then be able to keep 100% of the cumulative excess moving forward. So that's a huge deal. Probably around 8 to 10 million extra a year that we will have essentially recurring to our pot of revenue limited budget each year. So again, the unspent budgeted funds, cumulative excess, are what we can statutorily add on top of the REC projection. And that's what we call the revenue limited budget. So when you hear that term, the budget committee and council pass the CCOC revenue limited budget, or what's your revenue limited budget for the year? Those are the three components statewide that we have to build that number. And then on top of that, the fourth piece is any additional appropriation for court-related functions. So that's where state quarterly jury reimbursement comes in. A few years ago, we had the pandemic recovery plan funds, Hope Card funding last year, and then hopefully, I know it's currently in play, but the reimbursement for any Baker Marchman Act cases as well that we're currently requesting from the state. That state reimbursement would also be on that line. So this is what it looks like for the current year, 25-6. So those pieces and parts, the top is the REC estimate. The REC met in July of last July. $16.7 million estimate. So again, that is the main driver of our total. Then on top of that, the 50% of the cumulative excess from the prior year is the 10.9. And again, that's 50%. And then we are statutorily now required to move 10% of the cumulative excess into our reserve fund, which we'll talk about. So that's why there's a negative 1.1 million. And the final line is the unspent budgeted funds, which was 6 million. So you add all of this up, and that's how we established the $532.5 million current year revenue limited budget. And again, on top of that, in addition to that, we add in recurring appropriation from the state general revenue for $11.7 million for the jury reimbursement. And that's for the $544.2 million pie. So that's the statute that goes into that each year. So a quick dive into two of those numbers on the left in green, the excess that we've had since we were statutorily allowed to retain that in 1819. So each of those years, you see obviously the pandemic year, we didn't have any. That percent amount, which will hopefully change with the signing of 925, but that's the 50% amount that we were able to roll into that next year's budget each of those years for cumulative excess, with a 3-year average of almost $12 million. So that's fantastic. And then on the right side is the unspent budgeted funds there in blue. So going back to 1819, that's the total unspent budgeted funds we had statewide, which is average a little over $9 million a year. So again, that's 1819. Before that, both of these amounts just went straight to the state budget, into their pot that's called general revenue. But now, due to the great work of our legislative team, roll that into our budget and keep that. Thank you. And those two pieces and parts for 23-24 is what you just saw on that previous slide that go right there. So that's where those two numbers come from. Absolutely.
Just for clarification, the cumulative folks have collected in excess of what was estimated.
Correct.
And then the unspent budgeted fund is from what was. I'm trying to identify the difference. How to distinguish the difference between cumulative excess and unspent. Can you expand a little bit on the unspent and how those are determined?
Absolutely. Great question. What? Yes. Yeah. Thanks. So I'm going to repeat the questions because we are attempting to record this. We'll see how it goes, but I'm not being weird. I'm just going to repeat the question so we have it for recording. So the question was, Can you please explain in more detail the difference between cumulative excess and how that's determined and the unspent budget and where those come from? So that's a great question. So unspent budgeted funds are each clerk's approved revenue limited budget for the year. So let's say they had $1 million, but they only spent 980. So then the delta is what is the unspent budget. So that's determined in the settle up process, totaled up for the year statewide, and that's what fed into the 6 million. So a lot of offices don't have unspent, some do, but again, that's where the unspent comes from. And the cumulative excess is anything that we collect above the REC estimate. So current year, we're working on doing a fantastic job of going above the $516.7 million estimate for this year. So anything we collect above that, and again, if 925 is signed into law by the governor, we would keep 100% of any of that, and it would roll into that next year's budget. So, right. Thank you. Great question. Any other questions on how we determine the budget amount for the year? All right. So jury, and again, this is another that has seemed to spark some interest in the, especially in the budget committee world. So starting in 2016, the clerks were appropriated $11.7 million of state funding. So again, this is on top of our revenues that we collect. 11.7 million in recurring funding for the cost of jurors. So it's administered through our state arm, the JAC, the Justice Administrative Commission. A lot of times you hear JAC, but because clerks are not in the state budget, we have to go through a state entity. So the state entity that we go through is the JAC. So that's why we send them a lot of things. That's why a lot of our forms have a certification letter that's required through the JAC. So that's why each of these quarterly submissions that you send us require a certification letter. So, but again, that's housed through the JAC. It's appropriated in their budget, but it's just a pass through that once we submit the quarterly reimbursement to the JAC, they approve it, and then they send that back out through the Department of Revenue. In 2021, we switched from the old budget and reconciliation to the current reimbursement model that we're in now. If anyone remembers all the way back in 2021, there were 2 forms that you submitted for each quarter. And at the end of the year, it was a frantic moving funds around from county to county, office to office, trying to fully expend those costs that frankly aren't really in our control. So that's why in statute we switched to the reimbursement model, which now makes at the end of the year. And then we are able to send out, unfortunately now we send out around 70% a quarter of your actual cost. But the funds are released quarterly. So we have the 2.9 million that we send out statewide each year based on actual costs. This is something that is currently in play in the state budget. To increase this, we've asked for 4.8 additional dollars, which would take our total up to 16.5, which would fully cover our cost as it sits now. But I guess we'll see what happens downtown. The expenditures are tracked on the jury management form, which again, we'll talk about in a little more detail here in a minute. The guiding policies and procedures for the process, we established this, we switched to the reimbursement model. It's something that's up for approval. That we've revised it slightly, especially based on the new form. That'll be up for approval next week at the budget committee meeting. And then, like I just mentioned, we are currently facing a quarterly shortfall that's around 30% of a deficit per quarter. All right, so this is the, again, this is the same slide we keep coming back to of how we determine our available court budget. The 11 points that we talked about is right there. So again, those are all the pieces and parts that make up our $544.2 million courtside budget. So how does that compare throughout the history, the illustrious history of the CCOC? So going back to 05, 06, the first 4 years, is when the clerks were brought back into the state budget through the Legislative Budget Commission. As you can see, a substantial cut in 809 down to 910. There was a lot that went on there, but we were in the state. Then in 13-14, we came back out of the state into essentially how we operate now. So 13-14 is kind of ground zero for our current budget, which you can see, coming out of the pandemic in 1920, our budget has increased every year, and a few of those years very, very substantially. So just a zoomed in look at the past 5 years of our budget. Again, coming out of the pandemic in 2022, we were up to, and then with a lot of, frankly, legislative wins, clerks collection efforts, we were able to increase that this year to 544.2. On a little later, we'll talk about what is projected for next year, beginning in October 1. Okay, so what are some of our biggest cost drivers for the courtside budget? Personnel. Anything specific in personnel? Salary, yeah, salaries. So outside of salaries, one of our biggest cost drivers is what? Yeah, FRS. So, and health insurance. So the Florida retirement system, our FRS costs, is something that we're obviously required to pay. And it is 10% of our total budget each year. It is paying required retirement costs that we have. And this is something that is usually increased through the legislature. We have 4 main classes that we have employees, outliers, but mainly it's obviously the elected clerk, which is its own class, regular SMS, the senior management services, and then anyone that's in the drop program. So those are 4 different rates. There's 4 different pieces and parts within those rates, but usually the legislature increases 2 of those parts a year, and that's how we calculate the second column. That's the FRS increase that totals kind of the running total is 8. But that's the amount increase that starting years ago, the budget committee has picked up on everyone's behalf. So whatever your current personnel costs are, we take that, we plug in the new rates for all of the elected clerk, anyone in drop, the regular class and the SMS class. And that's how we calculate that on your behalf each year for the FRS increase. And that's where those numbers come from. So thankfully, the past 2 years have been pretty small. The 164 was barely an increase. I think it was only in the regular class. Last year, some of the classes went down. I know about 25 of our offices actually had a decrease in cost, just depending on the makeup of your office for regular SMS. And then this year, right now, again, the budget has not been passed by the legislature, but it's looking like it's not going to be a very substantial increase at all, if not, again, a decrease for some of our offices. So so far, the column on the far right, the FRS total, in 2024, we began collecting actual operational budgets. So that's what that column reflects, is we have 2 years of actuals of what we actually spent. So again, that's where the 10% of our total cost is just FRS. So this is, again, something that our legislative team has done a really good job of relaying to the legislature is, hey, even when we get increases in our budget, a ton of our budget is administrative cost, which in the state, if you're in the state budget, that's automatically covered and increased for you in addition to your budget. So we don't have that luxury. So again, that's another point that we really try to reiterate. Our legislative team does a great job of advocating for that. So, but that's just highlighting one of the costs that, again, is, a tenth of our budget. The reserve fund. So we mentioned this earlier. In 2021, we had legislation passed that allowed the clerks to maintain a reserve fund, obviously a response out of the COVID-19 pandemic, which our budgets were greatly cut that year. So we had the reserve fund established in 2021. And that's why one of the slides earlier that shows the 10% of our cumulative excess that we are required to put in reserve, that is where the bulk of the funding for our reserve fund comes from. And again, that's something managed by the CCOC through our trust fund that we have through Department of Revenue. There is a reserve fund policy again. This is also something that we're slightly revising that will be up for approval next week at the budget committee meeting, but that just outlines the statutory authority that we have, the certain scenarios that have to exist for we can use the reserve fund, and also how we build and fund that reserve. So again, that 2837 is the statutory requirement that we have for the 10%. And then to use the reserve fund, the CCOC must submit a budget amendment through the state budgeting process. Did I go backwards? Sorry. Sure. Okay. FRS question.
So my question is, our budget, we would do our FRS taxation, and it was basically included as one of the things that the committee, budget committee, adopted to cover whatever it is. Last year we were told not to put in any increases, but when you guys calculate what data do you use? Are you using data from actually pulling our current FRS designations then? Because we did have a small difference, but we didn't get covered.
Okay, great question. So to repeat, it's regarding FRS and what data does the committee use to calculate your FRS increase for you each year, and what is covered in that. So that's a great question. So the CCOC uses the operational budget, the current year that every clerk's office submits. So that's where we come up with the employees that are in those different FRS classes. So that's automatically covered. So there's no need for latest operational budget. Those are covered under the FRS. It's calculated automatically by the committee. You alluded to staffing. Happen to know of that before your budgets in June 1. That would be what, and we'll jump into that a little later, but that would be an additional issue request that you could have in the budget issue request submission. So I think a few years ago we had an office that was moving someone from regular to SMS. So they asked for that increase, whatever the difference was there, that they got on top of.
So I guess my question is, did have, and I did submit that, but then I was told to take it out because we're gonna do that and whatever your actual cost was. So that's what I'm saying, we didn't get that additional amount. So that's why I'm asking you. But it makes sense if you're using your operational budget that we started in June, that when we get ready to do our FRS for next year, we have changes in employees, the different categories they could be in and things like that. Also a small difference. I was just confused on that because it wasn't issue at all. Because I did turn it in, but then we were told to take it out. So
okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So yeah, I mean, if you have substantial changes, if you want to send in a revised operational budget, you can send it in tandem with your budget issue request and say, hey, here's, we've had these personnel changes since we submitted the operational budget back in December, January, and we believe that will affect our FRS calculation. And so we can use that as the justification. All right, so we went over reserve. Any questions on the reserve fund? Does anybody know what we have in our reserve fund currently? That's cheating. You're on the work group. Anybody have a guess? I'm not calling on you, Jason. All right, Jason. All right. It is 5.1 million. So a week or two, but it's better than nothing. And again, coming out of 21-22, those amounts you see are the 10% of the cumulative excess that we had, 50%, that have gone into reserve each of those years, which is built to a 5.1. We have not, thankfully, had to use the reserve fund yet. Hopefully we never will. But we'll continue to build that up through the budget committee. And the GFOA, I believe, recommends 2 months, 16%, which would be almost 89 million. So we have a little room to grow, but we're getting there. By the time my great grandkids are at the CCOC, we will have 89 million in our reserve fund. So budget allocation process. And again, we've gotten some fantastic questions from clerks and staff statewide on this of how is my budget determined, what goes into it, what's that process like. So again, base budget, a term that you will hear thrown out quite a bit in our committee meetings. This is something that in February of this year, as we've done the past 8 or 9 years, the clerks established a base budget. So usually that includes your current year, which for the budget will be last year, but it'll be your current year revenue limited budget plus whatever that calculated FRS increase is for your office. And that's what's been the base budget in the recent past. So a separate discussion is what goes into the base budget. By doing this each year, using your prior year's budget as your floor for the next year, that does allow all 67 clerks' budgets to not be cut, which is fantastic, especially because we are majority personnel costs. So that's great, but there is a deeper dive through the ABC budget or ABC for the budget committee that we have that's going to deeper dive into what is actually included in that base budget, and maybe again, and how we find everyone's fair share of the pie, what goes into that, and what is truly everyone's base budget, what should it be. So that's a deeper dive that will come in years down the road. But again, for this year's process, the budget committee has established the base budget, which will be your current year budget amount, revenue limited budget amount, plus whatever the legislature determines the FRS rate increase will be. So yeah, like we said, it ensures that at least moving forward, you know that your budget will not decrease. It will be at least what you have current year to operate, and then they'll go for an increase there. And then wanted to highlight, again, the clerk's budget has been cut since the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully we can keep that up. Then on top of that, once we have the base budget established, how does the committee allocate funding on top of that? Jason's really encouraged us to make a lot of this more uniform, which makes it easier. Some of our budget spreadsheets in years past, you've had to scroll quite a bit over. So we've tried to make it a little more succinct, a little more streamlined, and bring some uniformity into what we do. And again, that starts with the base budget, which includes your FRS cost. And on top of that, in the recent past, the legislature has approved new judges statewide. Last year, I think it was 29 new judges, some county, some circuit. But the committee has allocated 1 FTE per county, per judge, based on that in the recent past. And I think that's something that's on the table this year. If the legislature does approve the new judges, the bill that's currently in either the House or the Senate budget, likely the committee will at least consider allocating 1 FTE per county per judge like they've done in the recent past. On top of that, weighted cases, something that we'll talk about in more detail later, but weighted cases have been used in 5 of the last 6 budgets with a usually increasing percentage amount. So the 9.8 last year, while it's not the highest amount, that was 100% of the remaining budget outside of the 2.9 million. So new judge funding, weighted cases, that's a bulk of the allocations that the committee has implemented, especially in the past 3 years, almost 75%. 2 years ago, they did apply a pay increase. And there's a few other adjustments throughout the year that they do at the bottom there. So again, goes to the kind of uniformity and the streamlining of the process, but the budget committee can determine how to allocate any additional funding above the base budget as they see fit. And that's what will be the remaining 3 budget committee meetings for the year. This is what the budget development spreadsheet looks like. So it goes left, right, and this again is for the current year budget. So the first column is the revenue limited budget for the prior year, which is 24-25. On top of that, again, they added the $1 million FRS increase that we talked about per county. And that gives us the column there in blue, which is the base budget for the year, the 519.8. Then on top of that, bless you, the new judges approved 1 FTE per judge at the $2.9 million allocation. And then the next two columns are a weighted case allocation. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's the remaining balance was allocated using weighted cases, which led to a calculated revenue limited budget of the 532.5 that's there in red. Any questions on the process? All right. Funded depository. Does everyone know if they are considered a funded or depository clerk most years? All right. So when you submit your revenue projection, which is part of your budget issue request submission that's due July 1, we take your revenue projection for the year and compare it to your approved revenue limited budget for the year. And the difference is either funded or depository designation for the year. So if your revenue projection is less than the revenue limited budget, it's considered a funded county. Whatever that difference is, let's say it's $100,000, you'll receive $25,000 quarterly to fully support, give you the cash to fully support. If your revenue projection is greater than your revenue limited budget, you are considered depository, which means that you do not need a quarterly allocation, and that likely you will send whatever you collect above your quarterly projection, what's calculated on the EC report, that you will send that to the trust fund each quarter. And again, both of those are laid out in 2837 in Florida statute. So that's where we come up with the quarterly distribution deposits. So funded counties, again, through the Department of Revenue, likely every 3 months, kind of depending on a lot of issues we won't talk about today, but likely you will get that quarterly distribution that is established at the beginning of the year, again, based on your revenue projection. And that's one of the main important reasons that we really try to stress, at least to the best of your abilities, to have as accurate a revenue projection for the year as possible, is because that is the main use for it, is determining this for the year. And that can really help or hinder your budget throughout the year. And all of this is essentially what is determined based on your actuals that you collect through the year of what will go into your settle-up payment. So again, this was an important note, and a question that we received is, if you're a depository county, or at least at the beginning of the year, you're designated as a depository county, let's say based on your revenue projection amount and your revenue limited budget, you're projected to send in $25,000 a quarter. Well, if you collect $50,000 above your quarterly estimate, you would send the 50, or if you collect 5, you would send the 5, not the 25. So for depository, it's just an estimate. So we have talked about revamping that form, but again, you only send your actual amount that is in the yellow cells for the quarter on your EC report. Trivia question. All right, we have 6 trivia questions today. And if you get it correct, you get arguably the most valuable relic in all of clerk world, a CCOC lapel pin. So over the past 3 years, what is the average number of funded clerks per year? 55, good guess. 45 is close. A little lower. A little lower. Jackie Robinson. All right. Clerk Bailey, congratulations. Take good care of this. So again, that means on average, the past 3 years, there are 42 clerks quarterly funding from the trust fund to help fully support their budget. So a little more on the budget committee and what the budget committee does outside of the budget development process at their standing meetings. So there are currently 4 active work groups. The jury management work group, which oversees that jury reimbursement. They oversee the vision and mission of the 3 this year. We have the additional budget components work group. Last year, probably go for a handful of years, That's the work group we talked about that's looking at all of those components outside of weighted cases that have a cost, a real fiscal impact to your offices. Determining what that is, what that impact is. And then again, after that full holistic review, we'll then potentially look at the base budget. Reserve fund policy work group, which is policy. And then vacancies review work group, which will likely roll into next, looking at how we track vacancies on our operational budget. And thank you to all clerks and staff. If you serve on any of these work groups, thank you so much. We would not be able to do part of the work we do without these work groups, without your help. So a tremendous thank you to all staff and the time that you take on top of your already busy schedules to help us out. So this is just a handful of work groups that we've had since 2021 and some of the work we've done. So some of the outputs include the operational budget work group that we had a few years ago. They did the holistic operational budget forms that we have. I'm reducing that from 10 tabs down to 4. So that was a fantastic work group. The living wage group that introduced the MIT living wage data. That was, I believe, led by Clerk Nikki Alvarez-Souls. The statutory compliance work group, which confirmed that the CCOC Budget Committee and Council are meeting the statutes that guide us. The new judges funding work group established a new judges funding formula that we now have the ability to request funding to the legislature. We have unfortunately not received that yet, but the first step is getting that ability. We've established the formula. We've submitted it to the legislature. So hopefully one day, we get that additional state funding to our standing budget. And then again, the reserve fund policy established in 2021, the reserve fund that we have in existence now. All right, budgeting and forecasting. Again, we got a lot of really good questions on this. So UAS codes. Anyone here familiar with UAS codes? All right. So that is something that we are required to use in our, I say we, you guys are required to use as a local government entity is to follow the Department of Financial Services, DFS, establishes each year. And I think they just put out a revision to the 2022 one. But either way, that is something that, again, you're required to report all of your costs, not just your courtside costs, which is why the operational budget is now by the UAS object and account codes. Because before it wasn't, so you were having to take what you're already submitting and tracking in your systems and your ledgers by UAS code and then kind of molding it into our form. So the worker did a fantastic job revamping this and just laying it out by all of the applicable UAS codes. So hopefully it's just going through your ledger and cutting and pasting or printing it out and just putting it in exactly the UAS codes that are laid out. So hopefully that's been a time saver. We've heard kind of anecdotally that it has been, but that's kind of a continued goal, is to reduce our workload on you guys and hopefully get better, more usable data for the committee and the council. Again, I think based on last year's actuals, 93% of our total courtside costs were personnel. So we get a lot of questions on how do we budget for the year? What should we look at? What should we factor in? I think the tab B data that you fill out each year as part of the operational budget is the best guide that it seems like the most accurate guide to budgeting, because again, that lays out 93% of your costs, right? All of your staff that are listed on there. Apologies to Miami-Dade. That's why if you ever wonder why the form is 800 lines, it's to make sure we have room for all of their staff. But again, that lays out all of the required costs that go into that, the salaries. You can track vacancies on that. The FRS costs that we talked about, health insurance, FICA, all the required costs, and then automatically calculates what that court side would be based on your allocation that you designate for court, non-court. So one of the many challenges we have is through the 67 counties statewide, use a multitude of finance and budgeting systems, CMSs. They apparently look very different and CCOC has access to none of them. So it's a lot of times when you call us with great questions on, you'll say, in Fund 1302, I'm showing a balance of this. What are you showing? It's like, well, we don't know what Fund 1302 is. And it seems to be tracked differently, which is fine. But that's just one of the challenges that we have at the CCOC is trying to speak your language and what you're looking at when you're looking at your books and how that relates to what we're seeing from a statewide level. So if anyone has a good fix to that, please let us know. But that's again kind of one of the reasons that we have tried to model some of our forms and revamp them through the years, is to try to make it as accurate as possible and as relatable as possible to what we're hearing from you guys of what your systems look like and what they print out. All right, any questions? Direct them to Jason.
All
right, so again, that was a high-level overview of the budget development process each year. Again, we are halfway through. The budget committee is halfway through that development for county fiscal year 26-27. We've established the base budget. The REC will meet probably in July. They haven't announced in July. They will factor in, again, hopefully, if House Bill 925 report. Is anyone here responsible for any of these? This is not an extensive list of CCOC reports. This is just the ones that deal with budget and finance. Again, as you know, monthly, quarterly, and annual reports. In our effort, Jason has tasked us with trying to, like I said, reduce these reports, streamline them as much as possible, take as much workload off of you and your team as we can, but still getting good and if not better data in that process. So in doing that, we have actually merged what used to be monthly, then quarterly, and now it's no longer a separate report. The collections, the GR report, which was the Chapter 2008-111 report, that is now collected as quarterly data at the bottom of the EC report. And then also the revenue projections, starting this year, it is now a tab on the budget issue requests spreadsheet that's due again June 1st. So as you're filling that out, please make sure you see that first tab. That's the revenue projections tab. And we took it from a monthly projection down to an annual. Again, you're welcome, obviously, to budget or project your revenues on a monthly basis, but we really only use the bottom line total. So we reduced that down to, again, one annual amount, and it's a tab on the budget issue request. So what do these reports do? We get that question a lot. Why are we filling out the EC report? Why are we filling out our outputs report? Do you need this data? What do you do with this data? And those are great, valid questions. So the EC report, the expenditure collection is a report, probably our biggest report. That is where we get all of the detailed revenue, right? It's hundreds of lines of specific line-by-line revenue with the statutory references. That is where we get our monthly revenue. We use this, I can't even explain to you how much we use the data from the EC report. Outside of settle up, outside of that statutory requirement, again, one of the main ways that we've been able to work with the REC on the road investments, working on getting that increased outside of actuals and the collections efforts that you guys do, is using some of this data and showing trends. Jason's able to take this to those meetings and show increased trends and ultimately increase our estimate, which increases our budget. So the EC, again, very, very, very important. That's where we get our detailed revenue. The operational budget is where we get our detailed expenditures from, right? So the other side of the house. So this is the form that we used to only collect. It was one 10-tab form. that did budget projections. Now, as of 24, we have the prior actuals and the current year budget projections. Again, this is incredibly valuable information, including that tab B data that we get our detailed expenditures from. So that's how we're able to find the 10% for the FRS cost, some of the health insurance stuff we'll begin to look at. So again, EC reported the detailed revenues, operational budget, which is usually due around December, is the detailed expenditures. The jury management form is the required form that we have that we send to the JAC each year, which is how we determine the amount that is sent out statewide for your quarterly jury reimbursement. So we worked with, yes, sir.
I have a question about my projections.
Okay, we have a whole section. Is that all right? So the jury management report, we worked with the JAC to establish this. How it's laid out is how we are that data to the JAC. But again, the main purpose of this form is to ultimately request the quarterly amount that's sent out to you each year for your juror costs. And then last but not least, we have the budget request form. Again, this is due June 1st. Please feel free to call us if you have any questions as you fill this out. But this is how we get the needed funding each year. This is a very vital piece that the legislative team has that they can take and use to our total statewide need is, right? Before, this was really a used document or highlighted document. We were asked what our total need was. We frankly really didn't know. But this is a great way to determine that. And also the budget request in tandem with the operational budget completes the budget requirement for the year in statute that you have budgeted the issue request. So again, those are the 5 sent in on a quarterly basis, and then the operational budgets sent in once a year, again, usually December, and then the budget issue request is by statute on June 1st. Any questions on? All right. So the first one, the EC report. This report, again, tracks in detail court-related fines and fees, the revenues that you collect by month, by it does total the court-related expenditures at the bottom, but that detail, which again is why we use the operational budget. This also tracks funds transferred to the trust fund throughout the year, and that's on a annual basis. And then now we've added a few items to this, including FTE counts and separations. Today will be a CCOC budget committee. The statutory authority statute. Here that would be 10. But again, the main source that we and where we pull, we said use their settle up email. And this is where of these provide that detailed data on clerks' revenue. It's tracked with FTE. Accounts. We were getting asked quite a bit, especially with some legislative information on, and we would say this is let's calculate sell up important on these steps. Calculate it. And budget. It's now red. Okay. So settle up. Has anyone received this email? I know the clerks have. Has anyone, any staff? Thanks, Jason. So the snippet that we send all 67 clerks each year. One, as the mechanism for our settle up process. Also, apparently it is needed for when you guys are audited. But this is directly pulled from the settle up spreadsheet that we calculate each year. This is the email that we send, basically making sure that your books, money in, money out, is all reconciled by the end of the year. So the first column, your approved revenue limited budget. We've auto-populated that, but that's established at the beginning of the year. That can't be increased and hopefully is not used, barring statewide. So that is the budget that you are appropriated for the year. The next, there in blue revenues, but essentially money that you collect into your the C revenues, again, that's directly pulled from the EC report. This is all of those itemized revenues that you have by that's total for the year. And that number at the bottom, statewide, is what the REC is estimating. But this is actuals because it's settled up. So this is what you're saying, hey, on our EC report, again, we're Osceola. Is anyone here from Osceola? Okay, we're safe. We collected $9.5 million for the year. So we validate that with the Department of Revenue, make sure the EC report matches the Department of Revenue, matches the CCOC, we're good to go. So it also tracks funds received. Again, these are those funded clerks. So at the beginning of the year was designated as a depository, so they did not receive any quarterly payments as a funded clerk, so theirs will be zero. And again, we validate that. But if you are a funded clerk, this will be your annual amount that you have. So all 4 quarters that you receive throughout the year will be totaled there, and that should match what was designated at the very beginning of the county. This is probably the most confusing amount that we have, but this is the additional revenues. This is the annual once or twice a year budget amendment that we have through the Department of Revenue. This is the mechanism that we have to get the cash that we collect during settle up for cumulative excess and unspent budget that we talked about at the beginning, that we can build our statewide pie from. This is the mechanism that we have to get that cash from the trust fund back out to the 67 offices. So we do that on just a program basis, just get that cash out into the state. This frustrates our depository clerks because you're already, without this, going to send us money back to the trust fund. So this is just money that you book and will send right back to us. Thank you for your service. But again, that's the mechanism that we've come up with, is how to get that cash out. It's through a budget amendment that we submit by statute on February 1st. I think last year it came out in September. So I guess it got lost, but those 3 amounts are what is totaled there in that 4th blue column. That is the total revenues plus the funds that you received. And again, we validate that on your September EC report and also through the Department of Revenue data that we have that is sent to us from our friends at DOR. The 3 columns in red are the expenditure side, right? So this is the excess revenue that is sent to the trust fund each year. So Osceola is a depository clerk. They sent whatever that's 530. All right. They sent $530,000 to the trust fund in those quarterly distributions as calculated on the EC report. So again, that's something that we validate with their EC, with the Department of Revenue. And then their expenditures, their total courtside expenditures that aligns with the total at the bottom of the EC report. And again, that's outlined in more detail in the operational budget. So you add those amounts together, and that is what is essentially the amounts going out, which is the expenditures and what was sent to the trust fund. Unspent budgeted funds is not necessarily related to your settle up, but something, this is where we calculate that. And also, obviously, we need that for now what we roll over statewide into our total available revenue. But that is essentially your column, your revenue limited budget that's approved by the budget committee and council, minus your actual verified expenditures. And the difference is your unspent budget. The red and the blue, to from trust fund to settle up your books for the year to make sure that down to the penny, everything is in agreement and your books are good to go. So usually, I think this year was 65 clerks were over the trust fund, and those are statutorily due by January 25th. And I think 2 offices actually received funds from the trust fund. So we get a lot of great questions during this time each year. Hey, why am I sending you so much money right now? And so then we kind of pieces and parts, make sure that office's books agree. And then again, that's you guys have this email for auditing purposes when the auditors come, and you can say, hey, this was officially sent from the CCOC. Here's our email saying we agree. Our books are showing that we're closed. Yes, sir.
Why are we counting revenues on one time period and expenditures on another, and when it can be stopped?
Oh, Jason, okay. That is also, that's probably the most common question. Besides, what does CCOC stand for? That's probably the most common. In short,
But it does.
cash flow.
Yes. So the question was, why are we collecting revenues on one time period and expenditures on another? Right? That's essentially the question. And the answer is, in 2013, when the clerks begged the legislature to come out of the budget process, the state budget process, they knew that they had cash flow issues. So, as Griffin pointed out earlier, there are 42 counties that are funded statewide. Those counties don't bring in enough revenue in October to pay for their October expenditures. So what the legislature did for the clerks was they said, okay, you will bring in your September revenue, will pay for your October expenditures. And yes, it makes zero CPA, finance, accounting, it makes 0 cents. But they did that so that clerks would have the cash flow, especially those clerks who were funded clerks, would have the cash flow from September revenues paid for October expenditures. And that's the reason why. And to answer your second part of your question, when will it end? Probably never. Because unless, I mean, I guess we could ask the legislature to end it, but it still does have a problem for those counties who are funded in terms of having that available revenue, having that cash flow available from the September revenue does help you pay for your October expenditures. Follow-up. I feel it. I feel there's a follow-up. What is it?
A follow-up, there's got to be another way to do it. You still calculate revenues on the same time period. There's got to be another way to cash flow it while still calculating on the same time.
So the follow-up was there has to be another way to cash flow it but still having it on the same fiscal year. The The only thing that I can say is from, in talking to some other clerks, what they will wind up doing is they will take that September revenue and they will make it a, oh gosh, due to, and then they will then use that as a, and then they will put it as a due from other county government. And so the accounting of it is not exactly neat, but they wind up using it, by using it the due to and the due from, they are able to make everything balance. So, and that's unfortunately the ship we see ourselves in. I even have a, if you remember our former general counsel, Joe Boyd, he had an entire legal opinion about this that is currently it's pinned to my bulletin board in my office from 2013, because when I first started in when did I start? 17, 18? 18. When I started in 2018, that was the question that I got day after day after day. And I was like, you're right, it doesn't make any sense. I don't know why we do it. And then finally happened upon this legal opinion. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes some sense, but still. Oh, and one thing I did forget to mention, if anybody needs to use the restroom, you go right out these doors. There's a hallway right behind this stage. There's restrooms on the other side of the, right down that hallway. So, any other questions on this?
All right. Thank you, Jason. Okay, any other questions on the settle up process as a whole, or the email that we send you? Again, I think we mentioned it, but this is ultimately due, settle up is due by January 25th. And then we have, CCOC has 7 days to send the budget amendment based on the cumulative excess after that. All right, more on the EC report. So again, we briefly touched on this at the main screen, but the collections of GR, what used to be called 2008-111 report, which tracks the sum of the additional money that we collect but send to the State General Revenue Fund. We have had this report, I think, since 2008, but this is a very, very important piece of data that we collect, especially for our legislative team, because we've used this report in the recent past to identify those lines that are just otherwise merged on the same DOR remittance line. If it was line 47, it moved this year to line 48, but on your clerk's remittance system, it's line 48. But all of these, it used to be 90 lines. We've taken a few off over the years, but it's over 70 lines of revenue that's collected, and we wouldn't know what that amount is without breaking them out. So on this form, which now is on the EC report, but in the past when it was a standalone form, we collected this and tracked this, and we were able to take those amounts and that data that we had, and the legislative team was able to use that and get revenue redirects that now, instead of, due to statute, instead of clerks collecting these pieces and parts and sending them to the state for the state general revenue, we were able to retain those few lines and increase our budgets through revenue redirects. So we took those off the form because now that we get to keep those, and we added on the traffic additional court costs and the felony, misdemeanor, and criminal traffic additional court costs. So again, the goal is to track those in addition to everything else that's on your line now 48 of your remittance line, with the hopes that one day we can take that data again to the legislature and say, hey, legislature, if you are able to redirect these to the clerks and we can keep these that we collect, we could increase our budget by whatever that amount is. So again, very important data at the bottom of the EC report, now tracked monthly, now tracked quarterly instead of monthly. Again, trying to alleviate a little where we can any of those requirements that we have on your offices. All right, trivia question number 2. Which county currently has the smallest population? Yes, sir. Again, take great care of that. That's just, wow. with 8,140 people. All right. The second budget-related report that we have is a quarterly report that is the additional court costs. We call it the 318 report because that's the statute it refers to. This is just a pass-through, usually filled out by the other side of the house. We currently do not have, CCOC does not have a use for this. It's required by statute. So you send it to us as well as to the governor, House, and Senate, and the board. The other budget-related quarterly report we have is the jury management report. So as of last year, technically this is the first state fiscal year, but we took 3 existing reports that you currently sent, 2 to us, 2 to CCOC, and 1 monthly report that you sent to OSCA, and merged those into 1 single jury management report. So this now has 1 performance measure on it. The PI committee is doing a holistic review of all of our performance measures. So this could or could not be adjusted. But again, the main purpose of this form is to track the jury-related costs that, again, we send for reimbursement that you're sent through the JAC. And then also it now collects that data that used to be sent to OSCA on a monthly basis. And now we get that data quarterly, which gives us some good juror information that the work group's able to use and hopefully is beneficial. So again, oversight by the budget committee and the PI committee because of that performance measure. And most of the jury statutes are in section 40 of the Florida statutes. All right, the next one we have is one of our 2 annual reports in the budget world, which is the operational budget. So again, this one was due back in December of last year, but now has 2 separate spreadsheets. So we took the old 10-tab humongous spreadsheet, merged that down to 4 tabs, which is the current year projections that still have the extensive tab B for all of your employees, but also now just has all of your actual costs or projected costs by UAS code. And so it has those 2 spreadsheets that, again, the operational budget tracks our detailed expenditures. This is where we get all of our expenditure data that we're able to review and use, all comes from the operational budget under the purview of the budget committee. And again, the application of this, any analysis we have, any decisions that the budget committee and council makes now has this important expenditure, budget, FT analysis data at its fingertips. So again, we had talked about this being laid out by UAS code. Did anyone fill this out for their office this year? Okay. Did you find it easier being laid out by UAS code? Did it save? Okay, that's great news. So again, laid out by UAS account code at the top. The committee, or excuse me, the work group went through, pulled out any ones that would be applicable to your courtside costs. Those are laid out as the columns. And then all of the rows are the UAS object codes that are your personnel operating capital that you can put towards your courtside budget. And then this is the reconciliation ledger at the end. We probably get the most questions on any of our forms on this particular tab. But again, the goal of this is to help you reconcile all of your courtside cost with all of your courtside revenues, regardless of fund. So that's why this now includes your limited budget that's through your revenues collected, but also includes your quarterly jury distribution for the year, as well as any Title 40 cost, any funding that you receive from the board, or other, if there happens to be another source. A lot of times people ask what the other could be. It's not used a lot, but some people have public records mod fund that they are forced to use to cover some of their expenditures. So that's an example. Any local grants that you receive can also be reflected there. The data in blue is pre-populated for you based on your September EC report at the time that we sent these forms out. Due to timing, that may not be accurate. If there are changes to your EC report from when you originally submitted in September or October, when we send this out, if there are any changes made after that, as we go through the settle up process, you would have to manually update those. And that's why in blue it's auto-populated for you, but not locked. So for example, if something changed with your revenues, you said, oh yeah, we got audited, that number changed, then you can just override the auto-populated data and put the actual amount in there. And the same goes for the bottom there, the payments to the trust fund. So again, this is the reconciliation tab. On the actual operational budget, there's only 2 tabs. There is the UAS code. The second tab is this reconciliation tab that pulls that data, and then you fill in the missing pieces and parts of the revenue and the expenditures, and then that should reconcile down at the bottom again to your settle up amount, because anything that you put in addition to those CCOC budget and revenues that aren't tracked on your EC report, again, like board funding, like Title IV funding, that should be a 1 in and 1 out. So whatever the revenue you indicate on the reconciliation tab should mirror the additional cost that you included on the actual expenditures tab. Any questions on the operational budget?
For the reimbursement, there any consideration for not having our budget done?
Thank you, Clerk Knight. So the question was, is there any consideration specifically regarding Title IV for the legislatively to look at advocating for not having to get that reimbursement or reflect that reimbursement? Not that I'm aware of. I know those are federal dollars through the Department of Revenue. I don't think we've looked at Title IV. Is that true? So no, but that could be something that we look at. I mean, I think it's an additional funding source that we currently have to kind of help our patchwork of funding. But to your point, moving down to the board funding, that is one of the reasons we do track that, is because we obviously need that to survive, but by law, we technically shouldn't need that to survive. So we're able to take that to the legislature and say, hey, the board statewide is having to provide whatever it is, that shouldn't be happening. It would be nice to get our revenues increased so we don't have to go to the board. We don't have to go to Title IV. But I think, and again, I'm not really on the legislative team, but I believe the reason is because that's an external revenue source that we have. And, that would, if we got rid of that, then we'd have to find the funding elsewhere. Right. Similar to jury, right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on operational budget? All right. Like Clerk and I just mentioned, Title IV is tracked on there. In our review, Nolan in our office is doing a fantastic job. He's probably reached out to someone on your team about this, but Title IV has been one of the main things that we have seen on here. Again, whatever your actual reimbursement is that you reflect on the reconciliation tab, those corresponding costs should be reflected on the actual expenditures tab. The IT codes, 713, we've gotten some good questions on this on the survey. So the difference between 713 and 716 as it's currently written in the UAS manual, 713 excludes Public Records Mod Fund, and 716 is only to reflect costs related to Public Records Mod Fund. So that was a great question that we got on the survey. The work group added account code other, mainly as a catch-all. We didn't know what we would find, so we wanted to give you a place that you could put. If it didn't fit into one of our account codes for some reason, we wanted to give you the ability to still reflect that cost. But that's why we ask for the explanation at the bottom is, hey, what, and if we get enough of that, then we can go back and look at potentially adding a different UAS code on this form as we move forward. So thank you everyone for taking the time to fill this out. this again has been a huge benefit to the budget committee and especially the CCOC. So we're still kind of learning. It's year 2. So it'll probably change and get revised in the coming years. And again, reconciliation tab should directly balance to the agreed upon settle up that we have. That's what Nolan in our office uses, is the settle up email that we have with your offices that agrees. We balance it directly to this. If it doesn't agree, then we'll reach out. And that's the settle up. Again, Osceola. Last budget form that we have is the budget issue request, timely because again, it's due in a few weeks at June 1st. So this is where CCOC collects the needed budget, right? So anything that you have over your current year budget, and again, outside of FRS, outside of new judges, because those are uniformly captured and calculated on your behalf as part of our total requested budget. This is where we collect anything else I need, any pay increases that you have to match the board, the state, your whatever you deem appropriate for your office. That's probably the main issues that we get are pay increases and COLAs. We're all staff. Any additional FTE that you need, compliance, any additional FTE or items that you need for compliance, and now IT, right? So House Bill 1077 that was signed into law in 2024 now allows you to spend 100% of your courtside budget on IT costs. So it used to be limited to the 10% of one of those specific revenues. Now you can implement AI and have 0 staff if you want. But it was fairly overlooked implement that we had 2 years ago. But I think it's a pretty beneficial change. Is you're no longer handcuffed. If you have a software that you're now able to purchase that could streamline your office or bring your office up to date in some of your processes, now you're not handcuffed on that 10%. So you can use that to kind of get us a little closer to reality. Has anyone here ever used LASPBS by any chance? The state budgeting? No? All right. It's MS-DOS. You can't use a mouse. You have to use F1. I never use, I didn't know you could use the F1, 2 keys, but that's all you can use in LASPBS. And they still use that to this day. So more technology is obviously a benefit. Again, budget issue request. This is how the CCOC compiles this. It is a special tab on the budget development spreadsheet, which is available for the past 6 or 7 years on our website if you want to review. But we calculate and capture everything that's requested by all 67 offices and total those up. So again, it's very small, but it mirrors what the categories are that you can request for budget issues on the form, right? So the items that are grayed out are the ones that are calculated on your behalf. FRS, new judges, the jury shortfall is calculated on your behalf based on prior actuals. And then you have the ability after that to ask for the additional FRS that was mentioned, additional health insurance costs that you know about, or at least you project given timing, pay increases and COLAs, new FTE that are needed. We've added cost shifts, which are any board funding that you know that you have to receive from the county, compliance issues, IT. Now that number will go up based on House Bill 1077, and then anything else you can think of. So again, this is how we establish our total requested budget each year. We used to call it the needs-based budget, but now we are calling it the total requested budget. So, and again, if you want to review this, we publish it every year on our website for reading pleasure. As with most companies and government agencies, it's a requested issue. Budget needs, as valid as they are, that does not always equal actual budget, right? Most of the time, our needs and any entity's needs will always exceed, unfortunately, the reality of the limited budget that we have. So for example, in 23-24, our total requested budget was $527.2 million. Our actual court-related budget 2 years later was $17 million higher than that. So the reason I show you this is, while we didn't have a 23-24 actual budget of 527.2 million. 2 years later, we did exceed that. So we're not far behind. And that's obviously not ideal, but I think that's better than most. And same goes for the next year, 24-25. We had a total requested budget of 583 million. This year, well, next year, 26-27, we're projecting to have a $590 million budget. So again, 2 years behind. Obviously, there are needs that increase that each year. But you know, I think again that's a testament to the legislative team, to clerks' offices that have increased collections efforts that are 2 years behind our needed budget. Again, in my opinion, that's pretty good. Revenue projections. So this is no longer a standalone report. This is a solo tab that is included on the budget issue request spreadsheet. Again, due June 1st here in a few weeks. This now collects annual instead of monthly court projections. It also includes still Chapter 2008-111 projections that we're able to send to the REC. Again, Oversight Budget Committee, same statutes. And again, the main purpose of this that you send us each year is to establish your designation as a funded or depository clerk, including the amount that's sent each year to the funded clerks. Financial audits. Has anyone been audited recently? Okay.
I've got a question about projection.
Sure.
In an attempt to save court's time, you're collecting detailed monthly revenue on the EC report. We also know that the REC is much more accurate than we are at projecting our own revenues. So what's the point of us giving you a projection? A, it's not accurate. You already have all the details on our actions. You can make your own projection from the same data I'm.
That is a fantastic question. So the question was, why do we have clerks submit a revenue projection when the REC has a more accurate projection and the CCOC has monthly actual data to use? So that's a fantastic question. The REC does not project by clerk. So they just say, hey, here's the statewide total. So we would, if we just used REC data, we would not be able to say, okay, well, Culla, your projection is this, because we wouldn't be able to break that out. We do have, to your point, and Johnny in our office has more degrees than I think everyone in our office combined. He is fantastic at estimating revenues. The reason we use yours is, I guess, because technically y'all know what's going on in your office. If you have a better idea of, you know, what you're seeing in real time of, you know, you hired a compliance staff, or you implemented this that will help collections, or you know that your sheriff is going to write more tickets, that we probably wouldn't have that data. And then if your projection is higher, but you don't send it to us and we have it here, then you know you'd probably give us a nice phone call. So that's something we could look at, and the committee could consider using CCOC estimates. But ultimately, either way, yeah, there you go.
Well, and okay.
Yeah.
So the biggest reason why we still have you using doing revenue projections is for the funded depository calculation. So we need to know what you believe are going to be your revenue collections, and then we need to balance that against what your revenue limited budget is. So if your revenue collections are 900,000, but your revenue limited budget is 1.2 million, we know that we need to send you $300,000 from the trust fund. That's probably the biggest reason that we use the clerk's revenue projections. Secondly, again, while Johnny and I are doing the CCOC revenue projections, we do bounce that off of what you all are seeing, or what we see from you all. So we don't ever, I don't ever directly take your revenue projections into account when I'm looking at what I'm looking at. But once I have finalized what I'm going to take to the REC, I take a look at what I have versus what you have and make sure that I have not gone off the deep end somewhere. So that's, so it does provide a check and balance for when we're doing our work on the revenue projections from the CCOC side. And then again, because of the funded depository, we need a number from you that you think this is what I'm going to collect here, so that we can backfill all of those funded counties with the additional revenue from the trust fund. So that's the other big factor in all of that.
We will talk about that soon.
Okay.
And thank you. That's a great question. But ultimately, whatever your revenue projection is, whatever it's determined that we send funded counties, ultimately, high or low, it will be made whole in settlement. So if your projection is low, you will be sent more throughout the year. And if that's not how actuals come in, then that just increases the amount that you're going to send in settle up. So ultimately, it's reconciled by the end of the year.
If your projections are higher and you don't, then that's that consequence.
So the question is, if your actual revenues come in below your projection. So that depends on your budget. So if you had higher projections than your budget, then you'd be designated as a depository. So then if you actually ended up needing, based on actual collections, you needed funding quarterly, you wouldn't get that funding quarterly, but you would get it into the year and settle up. So you would likely then, in that scenario, you would be owed money from the trust fund. Again, lastly, DFS financial audits, not a report, but obviously loosely related to your report, something that they check on. I know that we send them quite a bit of data as part of their auditing process, but it's supposed to be on a 3-year rotating basis. I'm not sure if they currently are, but are getting back to it. We have contemplated putting a little information on our website so you can see if you want to look at some, just without county names and not specifics, but just here's some of the things they're looking at. Here's some of the things that have been in the recent audits as a resource. So probably more to come on that. Allowable expenditures. We got a really good question on this on our survey. So there are so many good questions that live in the gray that we get on, is this allowable expenditure? I wish we had a better answer on some of the questions that you guys send us, but ultimately all we have to go on is the audit findings that we compile, and then a 2-page document that DFS provided us that has a little more elaboration on a few specific examples of allowable or unallowable costs. But we usually get some really good questions that are outside of those. So again, we don't have great answers, but we try to work with DFS. We try to get as much information as we can. We try to provide and compile those audit findings to provide to you through some education that we do to hopefully alleviate that ahead of time for your offices. And then lastly, to point out again, going back to 2 years ago, House Bill 1077, adding that court technology. This is a question that we've gotten a lot, is we have let DFS know, hey, here's this legislative change. We are no longer held to that 10% that we were previously for court technology. So as long as you can tie technology to your court side and you feel confident that in an audit you can say, hey, this is a court cost, then the amount should not matter as long as it doesn't exceed your total budget. No longer, again, limited to that 10%. All right, any questions on CCOC reports?
Welcome everybody to the city of Seven Hills. I always thought that Rome was the city of Seven Hills, but I guess I was wrong. Once I moved to Tallahassee, I found out differently. I'm Leonard Carper. I work for FLCCOC. I was one of the people that was introduced at the beginning. And for those of you that don't know, I am the person that takes in the reports. everything that you send to FLCCOC as a report, as a budget, I get. And I review line by line, page upon page. If you go to church, it would be precept upon precept. All right, so let's get started. For those of you that are wondering, I won't be before you long. And I know you've heard that in churches before, but this is my slide deck, so I won't be before you long. All right. Trivia question. Who is the longest serving member of the CCOC team? Jason Welty? Oh.
Any other guesses? Okay. Somebody pointed.
Yes, you are correct. All right. Vanessa, right? Yes, okay. I have my glasses on so I can actually see that part and see your name. All right. You do. Yes, you do. Okay. All right. Just to let you know, I started right when the clerks transitioned out of the state system into their own, out of the state budget into what we have now. Also to let you know, I started in August of 2013, and I immediately went on deployment for almost a year in January. So I am very grateful to the people that hired me, and that is one of the reasons I'm still here. I'm a loyal person. All right, so we're going to talk about the CCOC reports, the intake process, and what I actually do with everything you send. All the report forms are available on our website, and we start doing this for one reason and one reason only. Each individual county, you have IT people that are trying to protect your websites, your systems, and so some of them have not allowed some of our forms to just be sent as attachments to email. So we had to find a different way that would allow, at the time, for everybody to get the forms without having IT issues. So we started putting them on our website, and then we would just send out emails telling everybody new forms are available, or the most current, or the recent forms have been updated. All right? In the same vein, we don't really have an IT shop that prevents you from sending whatever you want. But we do ask that you send it to reports@flccoc.org. All right? And one of the reasons is if you send it directly to me, it's going to get buried with all of the other emails that I get. So, when are the reports that were due to me? Usually 89. All right? And what it is that in 2024, I was every county was sending approximately 89 reports to us. All right, we've decreased that. All right, to 71. Okay, so for 25, 26, this is one of the things we're trying to do. As Jason said, we're trying to reduce the amount of work that you do. So some of the reports, the data has been rolled up underneath another report, or we decrease the number of times that you have to send the information. All right. One of the questions I'm going to ask, and it's not here, is what is the total number of reports submitted to CCOC by Clerk John Tucker? Clerks, do you know who John Tucker is? No. John Tucker was the very first clerk for the U.S. Supreme Court. He served from 1790 to 1791. Now, why do I bring up stuff like this? Because I like to find trivia stuff. And so whenever you see examples that of how to fill out a report, I've normally gone into history to get some information. All right? So I just threw that out there because there was an actual clerk back in 1790 and 1791. All right? Okay. Your submissions. We send out a calendar. I put it on the website. When I put the calendar together, what I try to do is I try to make sure that everything is spread out so you're not sending everything all at one time. All of you have workflow. I have workflow. So we try to spread things out. The monthly reports we try to get at one time. The quarterly reports, we were going to try to space them out at another time, but we decided, no, we'll just keep one day each month and try to be consistent, all right? However, your annual reports, when you look on the calendar, those dates, we've tried to space those out so that you are not doing that work at the same time you would do your monthly or quarterly work. All right, that's one of the things that we try to do. If you want to know when all everything is due, you can go to our website. We have a calendar. The due dates are in green, but also there are due dates for other reports and they will be in orange. And that's primarily for your quarterly reports and some of the annual reports. All right. What is the process? I know all of you attach it as an email and you send it to me, and you're probably wondering, why do I have to do this way? Why can't I just send it? When I first started in 2013, we had started a process where you could upload your EC report directly to a database. Well, we started making so many changes, and at the same time, those changes were costing money. By the time I came back from my deployment, we weren't really doing that anymore, okay? So would we like to do that? Would it be a lot easier for you? Yes, it would. But because all of you have different systems that you operate on, we're still sticking with the Excel spreadsheets because that is something that all of you have in common at this particular time. All right? One of the things that can be really frustrating is if your Excel program is not up to date. All right, if your Excel program is not up to date, then some of the things that you send on your report form may not come through to us. So we try to make sure that we send out the most recent report form using the most recent version of Excel. And then that way you can submit your data. Now, something that you don't see is that there are VBA programs that extract all of that data off of your report forms, and they put them into a larger spreadsheet. If you do not send the most recent report form, that VBA program may pull data from the wrong cells, cause your revenue to either show a substantial increase, show a substantial decrease. Same thing with your outputs report forms. Same thing with the budget form. So sometimes when I send out an email to any of you saying, hey, please resubmit on the most recent form, that's why, okay? The other thing is that, and this is just something recent, I haven't figured out how to fix it yet. Some counties will send their report form as a link. And I know that's because you're having data security issues. So that's what your IT people are wanting you to do. The problem is that I cannot download those because I also have a VBA program attached to Outlook. So let's say, as an example, this side of the room, you send me 5 reports on each one of your emails. If I don't use that VBA program, what I have to do is I have to open up each attachment, and then I have to review them and save them. So that's why I have the VBA program. That's part of the process. Let's say that without that VBA, or with the VBA program, I highlight each one of your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 5, that's 25 reports. I hit the VBA program, I highlight your emails. They all come down real quick and they get saved into a folder. And then I don't have to worry about opening everything all at one time or over and over again. All right. So sometimes that works without a hitch. And then sometimes if that report comes in as a link, it's not going to show up. All right. All right. Feel free to ask any questions that you want. If you want to know how I learned VBA, it was out of necessity. Because you remember I said I deployed? Well, I had to build a macro to make sure that some of those reports came in for one of my other coworkers. So all of the data would come in, and that was my very first macro. My background is I'm a PE teacher. I am a soccer coach. I am a sports management enthusiast, all because I didn't want to use my accounting degree. And that right there is another story. All right. Something really important that I want everybody to pay attention to whenever you look at the reports. I know they're all the way down at the bottom, but there are notes. And sometimes those notes explain why calculations are the way they are. Sometimes those notes will help you see the changes that we've made, okay? And they identify those changes. I also try to highlight different lines that change, especially on the EC report. You'll notice that there are a couple of lines on the EC report that are highlighted in yellow. That is because those are the new lines that were transferred from the 2008 or collections to general revenue. We were able to bring those onto the report, and therefore, or that money is now brought into your actual collections. So therefore, we wanted to highlight that so you could see, hey, this is new. This is what we need you to make sure is your report, okay? Reporting policies and procedures, okay? Griffin, as he's been going through his presentation, he's pointed out all the different Florida statutes, and he's explained the reasons for all of the different reports, why you have to submit the data you have to submit. And we also have business rules that we have on our website. If you have any other questions about those reports or about what you need to do, you can make reference to those. If they don't answer your questions, then by all means, send me an email. But now, here we go. You remember I said, don't send me reports through my personal email. Don't send questions to the reports email. Because all I do is just run the VBA to extract your reports. So if you actually have a question, you need to send it to my personal email or send it to Jason or to anybody else on the CCOC team. All right. Part of what I do when I look at your reports is I go through very quickly because I've had to look at them so long. I will compare your data very quickly to the previous 2 months. So on your EC report, when I get your EC report, the first thing I do is I go down to the summary tab and I compare, say for this month, I'm looking at your April report the April data, I'm comparing it to what you submitted in February, March. And I'm just looking to see if there are any extreme differences. As an example, if you had $400,000 in fines in March, 390,000 in April or in February, and then in April you have 32,000. I'm thinking you forgot a zero. All right. Going the other way, let's say that you had a fee of 60,000, a fee of 72,000, and a fee of 897,000. I think you probably hit the 8 and the 7 at the same time. All right. So I'll ask that question. But those are the things that I'm looking for whenever I go through your EC report, when I go through the data that was previously reported on the 2008-111 collections to GR. And so those are the things I'm looking for, all right, as I go through. So believe it or not, I actually look at all of your data before I run the macro that puts everything together. And when I run the macro that puts everything together, that is what Jason is looking at, that's what Griffin is looking at, and that's what Johnny is looking at. So they're looking at all of your data, each county, and they are also looking for anomalies, or they're looking for things that are missing. All right? Okay. All right. So that right there is part of the validation process. That's what I do. I try to make sure everything is there. All right. Something else that is really important is, you'll notice at the bottom of the EC report, there is a space for additional information or comment, anything you want to say about your report. We have put these on every single report for this reason. If you put it into an email, we would have to go back through all of the emails to see what the explanation is for an anomaly. And let's say that the 800,000, or the 900,000, the 890,000, and then the 32,000 is actually correct. Why is it correct? Is it correct because you had a system-wide failure, you couldn't collect any money? Is it correct for natural disaster that took place in your county? Those are all valid reasons. If you just put it on the form and you let us know, hey, this is why this is a depressed amount. This is why this amount is correct. This happens a lot with especially forfeitures and escheatures, or in the case of where there's a legislative change that causes people to come in and start paying a lot of money, or you start, or in the case of when you do your Operation Greenlight, your revenue increases primarily in traffic, okay? That's one of the things that we want to see. But since we know when Operation Greenlight takes place, we don't really need an explanation because we understand that, all right? Okay. And I say a lot, okay. I'm gonna have to stop that. Just to give you an example, when I was in high school, we used to count the number of verbal pauses our English teacher would make. And his verbal pauses were, please, do not, all right? So that's, it's just one of my faux pas. That's one of the things I do. So as you see up here, additional information, please put it on the forms, all right? If If you have any questions, again, like I said, about anything that you want to put on a form, if there are any questions about the how to compute something, it's not explained in the notes, give us a call. We'll have absolutely no hesitation in trying to help you out or anything like that. So I'm about to end. As I said, I will not be before you very long. What are some of the challenges? As Griffin pointed out, we don't have a single uniform platform for reports. If we had a single platform, which is what I was used to in the military, things would just be dumped. We'd pull the data. We'd send you questions. You'd ask us questions. We'd analyze it. Unfortunately, that's not what we do. That's not what we have. And so we have to go through different steps. And hopefully, if any of you have some ideas of what could help, please let us know, and we will see what we can do. The other thing is the different case management systems. If we had just one case management system for everybody, I believe that might be, somebody would say that that is a violation because that means that there's no competition. All right? It's not like the government. The government sets up something. It's not like the federal government. The federal government sets up, this is where it's going to be. That's it. You either bid for it or you don't. We'll build it ourselves. That's it. And finally, each one of you has a different version of the different softwares that you use. Hopefully, everybody is up to date, but I know when I first started, some people couldn't open up the Excel files that I sent because their Excel wasn't up to date. Some people couldn't open up the explanations that were sent in Word because their systems weren't up to date. Hopefully, we're not having that issue anymore, but if you're unable to open up something, let me know, and I will do my best to get it to you. All right? Does anybody have any questions? No questions? All right, I will now turn it over to, because I said I would not be before you long, Griffin.
All right, thank you, Leonard. I'm back. More of my voice. Sorry. All right, so I'll get this clipped on. Let's talk revenues and the REC. All right, so the Revenue Estimating Conference, one of our many, many acronyms that we have, the REC. It's actually the Article 5 Revenue Estimating Conference. And again, that is the entity that estimates our projected revenues for the year, which again is the main driver of our budget amount that we're able to spend each and every year. So the principles on the REC, there's 4, right? There's one from the House of Representatives, one from the Senate, one from the Governor's Office, and then one from the Office of Economic and Demographic Research, another acronym, EDR. So EDR is the research arm established by the legislature that provides independent forecasts. They do, I don't know how many different estimate. They don't do just Article 5 court-related costs. They do education, transportation, you name it. They provide estimates and forecasting data for everything. So again, not just focused on the courts or the judicial system. The CCOC and the courts each have a non-voting representative. So the clerks and the courts have principals that sit on the REC, but they're not voting members. So they're not one of the 4 main principals. So for the clerks, Jason Welty does a fantastic job on behalf of all clerks at those meetings. If you've had, has anyone listened to one of those? Has anyone been to one? Most exciting thing? Is it more exciting than today's training? Be honest. Right. She was just saying that. But again, they're very data driven. They are very in the weeds beyond in the weeds. So, and they always put them at 1:30 usually afternoon, which is perfect. So, anyways, the REC, the Article 5 REC meets at least 2, if not 3 times a year throughout the year to provide updated revenues. But again, the one that we use per statute is the summer one, again, usually in July, which sets the projection that we have for each year. And again, to reiterate something that we've talked about in budget committee that comes up quite a bit, but the REC estimates individual sources of revenue that we'll see and forecast that individually. They do not look at the clerk's budget. They don't contemplate the final number that we see. They look at all the pieces and parts that feed into that. So they don't just say, this year the clerk's budget's going to be 520. That's not how it works. That's not the estimates that they do. So this is just one of the spreadsheets. Class for you, but it's one of, I mean, this is the level of detail that they look at. They always include 5 years of actual data, and then the next 5 years of projection. Again, done by those individual costs. Some of those columns have, for example, they did meetings. They talk about why they're coming in high, coming in low, comparing to the previous. So again, it is a very, very, very in-depth, in the weeds, holistic review of each piece and part. And we just pull out some of those items that we have the statutory authority to do, which comes together to build our clerk's budget each year. So like we had talked about earlier, the REC does not provide an estimate for each individual county, right? They just look at the statewide total for revenues. So again, they don't say Leon County, we're projecting that you're going to bring in X, Monroe County is going to bring in Y. They only do it on a statewide basis. Yeah, they don't provide estimate by county, and statute requires that the CCOC budget, again, we looked at section 28 earlier, that we must balance to that REC estimate, which again is a statewide number. So the balance budget that you hear referenced in budget committees is referencing a total statewide number. It's then the job of the budget committee and the council to then allocate that fair pie through those meetings. So this is what our page, being the clerks, this is what our exhibit or page in the packet of the REC meetings looks like when it's done. They provide monthly projections of revenue by county fiscal year. The top is obviously state fiscal year because they're a state entity. They look at things through the state fiscal year months. As a solid to us, they now also do that for the county fiscal year, or they call it local fiscal year. So that's the bottom. So we look at the bottom half of this. That is the monthly REC estimate. So in the budget committee, when we provide those updates and say, hey, for the month of December this year, the REC projected we'd bring in 40 million. We actually brought in 45 million. I don't know if that's true, but it would be 5 million. That's the number, the estimate that we use in that comparison. So as you notice, the total there at the bottom, this is December. This is the most recent REC that we had. So again, not an official one, but a good update and a good increase that we had in year-over-year projections. That 550.1 million number for county fiscal year 26-27 is the number that we're currently using in our projections for what we believe our total budget will be for 26-27 here starting October 1. So, but again, that top line, the 550.1, again, which is right there, that amount is what will change and what will be finalized when they come in July to meet. And the second line there is the projection based on the staff analyses for House Bill 925, again, assuming that the governor signs that into law, that is currently projected to increase when they factor in the 550.1. In theory, it should increase by at least 9.5 based on the passage, again, of the revenue redirects to the clerks there in House Bill 925 that's currently on the governor's desk. So we don't know what that number will be. That's why we will work with EDR and the principals on the REC between now and then, look at actual data. But again, we are hoping that that number will increase even more. But again, we'll see, and that's mainly driven by clerks collections efforts, and then of course the legislative efforts. And again, we talked about this earlier, but you see the cumulative excess that we have from the prior year. This is now, again, the projection that we have for 26, 27, but we already know through the settle up process from last year, we know the cumulative excess number. We know what the budget committee put in at the 10% for the reserve. And then we know what the unspent budgeted funds were totaled from settle up as well. So again, right now, as the projection sits, the 26, 27 budget, the revenue limited budget would be the 578.9. Again, that's the projection we just talked about, and we'll come back to that slide in a second. So this is something that we often send out. We include in our budget committee meetings and our packets and some of our conference presentations. But this is the revenue that was settled up for 24, 25. So the actual revenue is the 515.5 is what we actually brought in for the year. That was, again, determined by the settle up process. That is the total of that column as we were going through that long snippet. That is what we actually collected, what you guys actually collected for the year, 515.5 in blue. The red line is the REC number that they established all the way back in July 2024. So anything that we collect above that, the 21.4 million over the REC, that is cumulative excess. So anytime you hear cumulative excess, that difference above the 494.1, that is cumulative excess. And again, prior to 2018, all of that, the 21.4, would be a generous donation back to the state general revenue funds. As of 2018, 2019, clerks kept half of that. And then again, if House Bill 925 is signed into law here in the next few weeks, then we would, moving forward, we would get to keep 100% of that. So again, that is a big deal, and even more of an incentive to continue our efforts to increase collections, because we would then get to keep 100% of that overage or cumulative excess. So back to this slide again, this is how we are currently sitting with our projections, but that 10.7 that we just talked about, the 50% of half of the 21.4, this is where it fits in to our current projections. So that's finalized. Again, the unspent budget's finalized. The only missing piece now is that July REC number. And again, right now we have 11.7 because that's a recurring appropriation from the state. However, we do have a request currently in play as they're meeting downtown this week and next week to increase that by the 4.8. So we're hoping that will be 16.5. We're also hoping, in addition to that 16.5, we will be able to add a second line there for the reimbursement for Baker, Marchman, and sexually violent predator cases. We have that request in front of the legislature now, but we'll see. So that is a substantial year-over-year projection, 46.4 million, 8.5%. So the budget committee will be very busy between now and October 1. But again, that main driver is mainly two things. One, the great efforts of clerks and staff on increased collections, and also the great work of the legislative team. Again, getting those revenue redirects, reiterating to the legislature our true need, the important work that we do that needs to be funded, and that's paying off in a big way. So here are the past 9 years of actuals plus the projection for the current year that we're in. So obviously outside of the pandemic, when courts closed, a $167.3 million increase. That is very substantial. Again, some of that is aided by the great work that your offices do. Some of that's aided by different revenue streams that we are now allowed to keep. But again, that is a substantial increase going from 380 million in 16-17, which again, that was the budget. And then 25-26, we're projecting to be at 550 plus the other pieces that we have to build our budget. So to me, this is tremendously encouraging, and hopefully we'll have to make the graph taller next year. So again, like we talked about, how is this happening? How do we have almost $170 million increase in 10 years? Because we know that the amounts of fines aren't increasing, but certainly the amount of the cases are increasing. So again, the focus that you all have had on increased collection efforts through payment plans. I wish I had $1 for every time Jason Welty said the phrase payment plans. Operation Greenlight, that really does have a great impact on revenues statewide and kind of getting the word, and we've seen those grow throughout the years. But just the focus on collections in tandem with the legislative work has really helped drive our revenues up, which ultimately, again, drives our budgets up. So I think that's great news. Trivia question. Over the past 3 years, what was the average annual amount of cumulative excess? Anyone? Keep in mind, you have one of these on the line. So
We don't move on until somebody guesses. Come on.
close, higher. It's double. A little higher. Yeah, total. A little higher than 20. That's specific, close. Who said 25? Close, that's close. 23.4. Sorry. You're welcome. Right, so now moving forward, hopefully we'll get to keep 100% of that, and hopefully that will continue to increase. So revenue projections. One of the good questions that we got on our survey was, and today, was how do we do revenue projections? Each year we get asked, how do you recommend we do that? Again, y'all are the subject matter experts. Y'all have a better feel on what's happening on the ground. But there are projection tools we've had on our website since it started from Citrus. Anyone here from Citrus? All right. Did you raise your Matt's from Citrus? But there is a revenue projection tool available if you're interested as a resource. Also if you wanted to work on some data, we are always happy to provide that. We can give you past however many years you want of data to look at. But again, this is part of the revenue projection is part of our annual budget issue request submissions that are going to due on June 1st. We'll compile those, and that'll be our statewide clerk estimate for the year. So there are 3 entities that project our annual collections. Obviously, we went through the REC, which is there in red. That's the official one that we base our budget on. The clerks in gold there, that is the total amount that we collect from your annual submissions. And then in green, the CCOC, which is Johnny and Jason's estimates that they've had throughout the year. So we read on this a few conferences ago, but I thought it was really interesting to look at kind of the, for lack of a better term, I guess, accuracy of the estimates compared to actuals, but also compared to how the clerks and CCOC project compared to the REC. So again, I think it's the actuals are there in blue. This is that same data just in a chart form. Again, I'm visual. So going back to 2021. You all right? All right. We'll go backwards. There we go. Okay. So again, same colors. The blue is the actual for each of those years going back to 2021. Red is the REC. To Clerk James' point earlier, the lowest total for the past 6 years has been the clerks, which is okay. That just means there's more funded and more money that will be sent back. I'm getting fired. No, they'll be sent back and settle up again. That is completely fine. But I think the CCOC and the REC have the advantage of having more time and more data and more I guess it's more of our duty to really look at and dig into the pieces and parts on a statewide level. And so I think that's pretty beneficial to look at. So, but again, this was interesting, something we went over a few years back. Some of the years that you see that are very high, the actual, 2021 was coming out of the pandemic, which, you know, that was a wild card. Everyone was obviously very, very low that year because you know what was going to happen. 21, 22 it was the PIP reform, and 22, 23 was the tort reform. So again, those are things that we would not have known when you submitted your annual amount. You would not have known that. We would have known that. The REC did not know to contemplate that because that was legislation that was passed later on that had a tremendous impact on the revenues. Biggest revenue that we've had ever for a monthly revenue amount was that tort reform, March of 23, which was 64 million. We've only exceeded 50 million outside of that one other time, and it was last month. So great job, 52 million. So again, hopefully that number continues to rise, and we'll have to make another graph taller. So in summary, again, on revenues, increased revenue collections, the focus that we've had, that your office have done, has truly increased the budget in a big way that we've seen. Clerk Patty's not here, but as he always says, a rising tide lifts all boats. That could not be more true. Your collection efforts really do move the needle, which ultimately results in increased budgets. Any questions on revenue or the REC? Is anyone going to the July REC meeting? Okay.
Can I ask questions of the audience?
Please.
There we go. So from a revenue perspective, obviously we saw that the clerk's projection was usually more conservative, which I would expect because accountants, you all are going to be conservative on the revenue so that you can make sure that you have enough revenue to get to your expenditures. Am I right? Can I get a show of hands? Yes? All right. Amen. That being said, is anyone interested in CCOC providing you with a revenue projection that we see your county with? All right, I see a smattering of hands. Okay, that's something, again, one of the things that I want to create at CCOC is a service-driven process. And if this is something where instead of you providing your revenue projections to us, if I provide your revenue projections to you, make sure that you're okay with it, and then get that sign off, I think that will increase what the clerk, quote unquote, revenue projections are that we see on June 1st. Another question I had, can we go back a couple of slides? Maybe yeah. Come on, let's go. One of the other questions I had that I wanted to ask you all, so that was the budget development, cumulative excess. Oh yes, so Griffin kind of stole my thunder because he told you the only other time we've been above 52 million was this year with, you know, this March. How many of you are doing Operation Greenlight events during the March, April? That's what I figured. Are any of you doing them outside of the one-time annual sort of, okay, fantastic. Matter of fact, I have seen your revenues go up in the months that you do them outside. You did them like last November or October? Yes, Miami-Dade. As Dade goes, so thank you. I'm getting in front of the revenue estimating conference and saying, we need to increase budgets because, and then I can give an example from when you look at the February revenue compared to the March revenue compared to the April revenue, When that revenue jumps, February this year, we were in the 40 millions. March, we were in 52. It's driven by this. It's driven by this. Yeah, it's driven by the income tax because people are paying off their debts. But you couple that with the fact that you have Operation Greenlights, where you have people who are coming in trying to avoid that extra penalty, and that's where we can really help some of our revenue. So that between that and payment plans, Griffin said I mentioned them too often. But and again, this is another one that I wanted to highlight. These are legislative wins. These are right here. We have this is directly attributable to a lot of what we have been able to do both with CCOC and the association on putting together pieces of legislation that are going to pass the legislature and putting together packages that are measured and get us going in the right direction. So that's the last piece I wanted to just kind of throw. If I have anything, I'll come back up and I know where to find you.
All right, thank you, Jason. All right, any final questions on revenue REC fund? All right, let's jump into case weights. All right, we saved the best for second to last. So like we mentioned earlier, the PI committee and their work groups under the PI committee are currently doing a very in-depth review and update of all case weights. The budget committee has used case weights in 4 of the last 5 years under allocations above the base budget. The ABC work group, like we talked about earlier, is really digging into anything that's not included in the case weights that has a fiscal impact on your office, AOs. We sent out a survey on branch locations and the costs associated with that. We're looking at cost of living, fiscally constrained counties, anything else that the work group deems to have a fiscal cost. So the goal of weighted cases is to establish a data-driven comparison of clerk offices based on the work they do, right? Clerk's offices do cases. That's a bulk of what we do. It's not all we do, but that is the closest thing that we have to be able to compare and contrast offices and then ultimately the budget allocations based on that. So a question we often get, how do you calculate my weighted cases? We take your actual case counts from the prior year as submitted through the outputs report. We multiply that by those weights per case that we'll talk about in a second. And that total gives you both your individual weighted workload measure, weighted cases. Also, it gives us the statewide total that we have. But that's the formula. So some example of weighted cases or case weights themselves. It's right now it's 1 through 10. I don't know how valuable this will be because again, the work group is revamping this. It has to be approved, but at least as it sits now and as it's been used in the past few years, it's a 1 through 10. That's an example of some cases that are weighted a 1, right? Like a notice of trust. If you had 5 of those throughout the year, you get 1 for each of those. So that weighted cases would be a 5 total. Guardianship, that is a 10. So if you had 3 guardianship cases, that you would get 30 weighted workload measure units. But that's not obviously all of these. There's 1 all the way through 10. That's just a little idea of what the actual weights are. And again, note, they're going to change probably. Yeah. The weights per case. So great question. Who determines the weights? So right now, those were established 2018, 2019? 2017, sorry. They were, through the PI committee, they did a holistic review, established the case weights. Over the years, based on data changes, they really changed or updated 1 or 2 individually. Like traffic went from a 3 to a 1.5 in 2021, I believe.
That is correct.
Okay,
Yes.
So kind of looked at pieces and parts, but this year, or last year technically, we had a workshop all-day workshop that is morphed into these subgroup meetings, but that's something that the work group's currently looking at is these case weights. So whatever comes of that, if it's approved, those will be the new case weights. But they're looking at time it takes, work that goes into it, how they compare. Lindsay and Matt have done a tremendous job in our office kind of spearheading that, but it's this is by far the most in-depth review that we've done on anything, but it'll be the case weights.
And we also anticipate starting to do this every 5 years or so, because we had the case weights in 2017, but we didn't start updating them holistically until 2025 and now into 2026. So I'd like to make sure that we are taking a look at these every 5 years, because as we all know, things change quickly when, especially when you talk about technology. There could be an AO, there could be a Supreme Court AO, like the things can change quickly that can change the workload for clerks on these individual case types. So we're going to start, this is going to become part of CCOC's work plan to be looking at these and constantly making adjustments and then doing a holistic review every 5 years or so. Yes, Mr. Bailey.
Do they have anything for appeal?
So the question was, do they have anything for appeals? And yes, we do have sub case types for appeals in various different court types. Now, we've had some comments and questions about appeals and whether or not this is supposed to be appeals to the DCA or whether or not these are supposed to be appeals from the circuit court or from the county courts to the circuit court. We have to do some more legwork on our end, on the behind the scenes, to kind of get questions to those answers, or get answers to those questions. But yes, the appeals are part of the subcase types that we're currently looking at by court division.
All right, thank you, Jason. So this is just a snippet. I mean, this spreadsheet is thousands of lines long, but this is just a snippet to see the subcase type there in the middle, the totals for this individual county, the weights that are there, that's standard statewide. You multiply those, again, that's how you get that weighted total. All the cases for a county for the year gives you their weighted workload measure, and then that's what has been the weighted cases for the past however many years. Yes. Okay, thank you. So the question was, in the current review of looking at the case weights, are the work groups looking into and considering the work and the time that goes into these? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's why each, again, I was joking earlier when I said 40. I think they've had 40 work group meetings. It's close. I mean, it's a ton of great discussion, a ton of great staff with a ton of knowledge that have really dug in, and there's been some really good conversations and discussions on why case type A is a 3, why it should be. I think there's even considerations of things making them like 2.8, 2.85, I mean, to that level of detail. So that's the main driver of this.
And we can get you more information on it, but what we did was we actually created a matrix that looked at 10 different, how do I phrase this? 10 different factors that go into every single case. So things such as how difficult is the case from a filing standpoint? How difficult is the case from a post disposition? How much work is involved with communicating between the various different parties? How much work is involved? Is it jury related? How much work is involved with the jury? So we broke every single case type down and looked at it from these 10 factors and said, how difficult is every single subcase type that we're looking at from these 10 different factors? And then we're going to add them up and then average it out and make sure that it is, and we do have subject matter experts from across the state. We have large counties, we have small counties, we have medium-sized counties, we have across the spectrum, and that was the whole point of doing what we've done. So in December, we brought together 112, 115 people to Daytona to start this process, and then since December, we have continued that work and said, okay, this is what we came up with in December. How do we need to adjust it? So if a case was weighted on, how difficult was it to the pre-filing of the case? In December, we said it was a 2, but we really think after talking with some of the experts, it's really more of a 2.5 or a 3. We've now changed that to a 3. So we are diligently trying to make sure that these case weights are as accurate as possible, looking at it from across the spectrum of county size and across the spectrum, quite frankly, of technology availability too, because that's something that we have seen, those counties that have more tech, they tend to rate things a little bit lower because the tech's doing it for them. So, but yeah, that we can definitely get you some more information on it as well. So, sorry.
All right, so we mentioned earlier that weighted cases were implemented in budget allocations in 4 of the last 5 years. So this is the amounts and percentages that were used. And again, these are in allocations above the approved base budget each year. But going back to 21-22, you see 7.5 million was allocated all the way to, again, 25-26, the current year wasn't the highest amount at 9.8. But it was 100% of the available increase, which is the first time the committee has chosen to do that. So in total, since the creation of weighted cases, they have been used and implemented by the Budget Committee and Council to appropriate $57.6 million in the past 5 years. And we mentioned 18-19 earlier. It is worth noting that's the first year that these were considered by the Budget Committee, but ultimately were not used until 21-22. So again, this is the budget development spreadsheet that we went over earlier today. Same thing for the current year budget, but again, to highlight the highlighted in red, those 2 columns, what's grayed out is the actual weighted cases themselves. Those are the kind of the units, the case, case counts times the weighted cases for each county. And then the column that's add weighted workload measure allocation, that is the actual $9.8 million based on portion of the total 19 million weighted workload measure units. So that is how this current year weighted cases were allocated to all 67 clerks current year budget. So Jason's favorite slide that we've ever created, but this is actual data of how weighted cases has influenced our budget. So in 18-19, when these were first considered, maybe our real counties. So one of them, they're similarly situated counties is the term, we call it peer groups, but that's the term in statute, is similarly situated counties, meaning their size, their cases, their case types are similar. So they're, in theory, their budgets based on that should be close to the same. But in actuality, in 18-19, for whatever reason, their budgets were $380,000 apart, right? County A had a higher budget. Well, by implementing case weights and data-driven, metrics into the budget and allocating dollars based on that, in 24-25, those budgets now are only $290,000 different. So it shrunk that gap, air quotes, gap between the two based on the data by $90,000 just by implementing weighted cases to the additional allocations that we appropriate each year. That's not even touching the base budget. So again, bottom line on that, weighted cases help bring County B closer to County A based on the actual case workload of each of those counties. So this is what it would look like if those same counties, if we did not use weighted cases in our allocations and just did an across the board allocation. So again, that 290 from this slide, where they were using weighted cases, that middle slide, the 24-25 budget, what it would have been without it, instead of shrinking down to 290, would have actually increased. The difference would have increased up to 430,000, just expanding that difference. So based on the data, in weighted cases, it more equitably allocated the budget of these two counties, again, based on that data-driven number. So again, back to the beginning, of our $544.2 million pie, the Budget Committee's task and duty is to allocate, again, what is believed to be each clerk's fair share, dividing that pie 67 ways. And again, an impossible task, right? How do you compare a Liberty County to a Miami-Dade County? I mean, those are two different universes, right, of size. So a very difficult task, but weighted cases among some other data that we continue to collect, thanks to you all, is helping hopefully make this a little more data-driven process. All right, trivia question number 5. What is the percentage increase of the correlated budget since 2017-18? Anybody? 8. A little high. Close. Yes. 30. So 33%. There you go. Enjoy.
But 17, 18, it also happens to be when I started at CCOC, just
So,
FYI.
Jason put his face on the slide.
This is the clerk Welty increase.
The Welty effect.
The Welty effect. Thank you.
All right. Any questions on case weights, weighted cases, allocations in the budget process? All right. The question is, are we using output reports to determine that? Yes, the case counts do come from the verified prior year actual case counts as reported on the outputs. That is correct. All right. Last but not least, we are going to go over budget issues facing the clerks. All right. In your office, what is the biggest budgetary issue that you have facing your team? Hiring staff. Okay. Retaining. Keeping staff. Okay. And all of that comes down to an IT. That's right. So total amount of funding, right? I think we'd all agree that that is, or lack thereof, probably the biggest issue facing clerks' offices, unfortunately, today. So we often say this, you hear this said a bunch, but how do we justify that? So this is something that we work with the association with, and they do a fantastic job of making this eye-popping reality that we have as clerks compared to our criminal justice friends, right? So those are our criminal justice partners. The increases they've had over the past years, we are in red. So again, you see, if you don't look at DLA, the Attorney General, or Department of Law Enforcement with over 100% 10-year increase, public defenders go by 50%, trial courts by almost 50%, JAC, 36%, where our budgets have increased by 22.7%. So again, this is just another helpful tool and data point to show we continue to face an uphill battle as clerks, and funding, again, is a major part of that, or lack thereof. So this is a dive into our budget compared to just the trial courts. So we're in gold, clerks are in gold, trial courts are in blue. So if you go back to 14-15, our budgets, clerks' budgets, were almost $40 million higher, trial courts' budgets in 14-15. Fast forward 11 years to last year, the trial courts' budgets were almost $100 million higher than the clerks. So, I mean, that's a $139 million swing, not in our favor, or 11 years. So again, just a good perspective to have in our funding. And again, this is not to say that we haven't, the legislative team has done a tremendous job in increasing this. Just imagine the deficit here if we did not get some of those legislative wins that we got. But again, this is good perspective we can take to the legislature to reiterate that, you know, there's a reason we have a clerk's bill every year. We're still trying to catch up. Has anyone seen this chart before? Y'all don't read our annual report? What? Gosh, okay, that's news to me. But this is included in that. And again, this is another good handout that the legislative team has. So this is all of the money and revenues collected by the clerks for 24-25. The part of the pie that is in navy blue is what clerks retain. So the other 41.3% go elsewhere by statute. Some goes to general revenue for the state. Some goes to the state courts. And then the $100 million that goes to various state trust funds, that is the listing that's there in red. Is how many different trust funds that a lot of the money that your offices collect, where they go. So again, another good data point that we have to point to say, hey, you know, we are doing this, but it is going everywhere. So let's increase that 58.7% of what we get to retain for it's another good data point we have to take to the legislature to really reiterate and show the uphill battle we face. How do we fix that? We need the planets to align. No, there are ways that we have to address this. And again, we go back to, this is our statutory budget amount that we have. So one way we can do it is revenue redirects, right? Legislative did a fantastic job in recent past redirecting revenues instead of sending them to the state. We keeping those, increasing that budget number that we've seen and talked about. And again, we've gotten quite a bit of those in the recent past and continue to hopefully get more in the future. Cumulative excess, right? This is one that's on House Bill 925. If that's passed, check that one. We now get 100% of cumulative excess. So that's a big deal. That's a recurring amount that we get to add to our budget each and every year as we build our budget. Another one is jury funding. Again, we have this quest currently in play. We get that 11.7 million from the legislature. Hopefully that will be increased to fully fund our jury process up to 16.5, but that's another way. That way we don't have to eat that difference out of our existing budget. The state will fully cover that as outlined in statute. And then finally, any additional state reimbursement, again, we have asks for funding associated with new judges based on the formula. We have, you know, the jury increase. We also have the no fee cases, the Baker Act, Marchman Act, SVP cases that we're asking for reimbursement. Out there is also, we'll talk about in a second, but you know, indigency cases that we work and injunctions for protection. So again, there's a ton of revenues that we have, some avenues that we have to increase our budget. And again, the legislative team can't say enough about the great work that they're doing. Jason, you want to
Yeah, I'll come up there.
tell us about our request?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm constantly checking my phone because this is budget week here in Tallahassee. So with conference, you only get 1 hour notice. So I'm looking, I keep looking at my phone, keep looking at anytime my phone buzzes to make sure that I'm not on deck to go anywhere, but I don't think so. Morgan, you're going to tell me, right? All right, thank you. So we have 2 budget requests in this year, and both of them are related to reimbursements. So we have a budget request in for reimbursement for injunctions for protection, as well as your Baker, Marchman, and sexually violent predators. The sexually violent predators is not up there because it's a very small number. I think it's 59 this year. But we always throw it in whenever we're talking to the legislature, because anytime you say sexually violent predators, their ears perk, because those are people that they don't want in our community. And that's one of the things that we use to make sure that they are listening to what we're asking for. So, but that first one is a $5.5, or excuse me, it's $5.5 million budget request for those reimbursements for those case types, injunctions, Baker, Marchman, and sexually violent predators. In addition to, we are also asking for, although it's not currently, this part is not currently in the budget, but approved indigent applications. So that is potentially, if those 43,000, 44,000 cases were to be funded at the $195 reimbursement, which is the typical clerk fee that we would get on a case of those types, that would be an additional $8.5 million. So that would be $14 million for reimbursement for those cases that have the clerks cannot collect a fee on. And we often in our materials that we present to the legislature, we agree we should not be collecting a fee on injunctions for protection, or a fee on Baker Acts, or a fee on Marchman Acts. But at the same time, we have work that we need to do on these case types. And so we are hoping that the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, sees the value of the work that we do in these case types and provides that reimbursement for those cases. So additionally, so again, this is 3.1 million for the injunctions, 2.4 million for the Baker Marchant SVP. Additionally, we have a request for jury management funds of 4.8 million, which we've had for the last several years, because as we've seen, as inflation goes up, so does jury management. The number of trials that we have seen has also gone up. The number of, I think, in some of the material that we've given to the legislature, we've seen over a 40% increase in the number of summonses in the 10 years that we have had the 11.7. And in that same time period, so not only has the number of people that you have called into your courthouses increased 40%, in that same time period, postage has increased 60%. And yet we still remain at 11.7 million, and it is just quite simply not enough. So we are hopeful. We currently are sitting at both, the Senate has both the the 4.8 million, as well as the 5.5 million for reimbursements for no fee cases. We are hopeful that the Senate holds strong. We are hopeful that the House matches the Senate with those two amounts, because that would be optimal. That would be optimal. I'll tell you today, I would take one or the other if I had my druthers. But I would definitely welcome having both. Additionally, we put in for additional support for judges. It does not look like that is going to be very favorable for us this year, but that's going to be something that we continue to harp on, because the legislature cannot keep creating judgeships without giving us something to do in terms of having some staffing available for us to be able to work those judgeships. So, do you want me to cover this, or? All right. Does anybody have any questions on those little pieces right there on our budget request? All right. So collections of GR. So lines 154 through 158 of the EC report, these are what was originally the collections to GR. This is the driving under the influence, the additional traffic court costs, the felony misdemeanor traffic additional court costs, and then everything else that is in line, what is 47 on the form, but it's actually 48. When you submit your revenue through the Department of Revenue, what is that, CCRS, when you submit your revenue, everything else that you put on line 48, that should line up as to what these things are. And I think Griffin touched on it earlier. We have used this report in the past to identify places where we can go after and redirect general revenue from the state to the clerks. If for those of you who have been filling this report out or have filled this report out in the past, we used to have county summons was one of those lines that we used to collect, and then we wound up taking that county summons, redirecting it to stay within the fine and forfeiture fund locally so that we no longer had to send it to GR. So this is, we have taken this report away from being a standalone report to a report that is now just within our EC report. And we've also made it so that it's quarterly, so it should be a little bit easier for you to handle from a filling it out standpoint, because we don't really need the money or the revenues monthly. Having it quarterly lines up perfectly, because then we can at least see where the trends are going. And then we can also say, if we wanted to say, for instance, take DUIs, we could say on average, on any given year, clerks collect $5 million related to DUIs. And that would be something that the legislature then could consider and redirect back to the clerks and let the clerks retain that funding rather than for us to send it to GR. So, and again, we previously had an entire report on this, and I think we did it monthly, right? Yeah, and now we've just included it into our EC report. So, I will talk a little bit again. Griffin's mentioned it. I will hammer it home, because when I started at CCOC in 2018, we had gone through about a 3-year period where every year there was a reduction in funding. And then starting in 2019, we started seeing some legislative wins that have allowed the clerks to really start to get back on the rebound and get us back into a posture where we are in a better place. I think we saw earlier the clerks compared to our other judicial partners. Who recalls what the percentage increase was for the clerks over the last 10 years? Last year, that was 6. The year before, 6% increase compared to, they had 50%. The year before that, it was 1.9. And that's because of the legislative wins that we have seen over the last 6 years. So HB 337 in 2019, that's where we got the 50% of cumulative excess. I think Griffin showed you over the last 7 years, cumulative excess has been averaged about 10 million a year. Yeah. So yeah, and so 2022, that's where we were allowed to request funding for new judges and request funding for Baker Act and Marchman Act. Now, the legislature has not given that to us yet. This is our year, right, Clerk Fernandez Barquin? This is our year. So we're looking forward to hopefully getting some of that GR that can then be a recurring sort of recurring within our budget, so it helps plug our gap from year to year. So in 2023, we got 17 million in annual redirects. 2024, we got an additional 30 million, almost 30 million in redirects, 29.4. And we also were able to add the phrase improving court technology so that we could use your court-related budget for technology purposes. For those of you who are really into the weeds and understand that previously you could only use your public records mod fund for anything tech related, and you couldn't use any of your CCOC dollars for anything tech related, this was a huge ask for us to get, because this now allows you to go beyond just what's ever in that small amount, especially for counties who don't have a lot of public records mod fund. This now allows you to use some of that court-related revenue related funding to improve your court technology. And this gives you additional options and additional ability to provide for the services that you need to provide for without having to go into the negative on your public records mod. And then last but not least, last year, 9.5, or no, this year, sorry. I guess it feels like last year because we're here in special session E. 9.5 of additional revenue redirects and allowing the clerks to retain 100% of the cumulative excess. Again, two very big legislative wins that are helping us drive the clerks' budgets where they really need to be. So that is, over the last 7 years, that is almost a $90 million annual impact. Over the last 7 years, that is almost a $90 million impact. So again, it wouldn't be possible without the coordination. You know, CCOC, we have worked with the association and their legislative team. They're absolutely fantastic. We have a representative back there. I won't mention who it is, but she knows who she is. But it has been an absolute joy to see, because this is the chart that you see. You know, when we were in the state budget, that's that light blue shaded area there. When we were in the state budget, we were relatively stable. Then we came out, and then the wheels fell off until 2017, 2018. And you can see from that point, we started steadily growing. And again, minus the reduction in 2020 because of COVID, these are the legislative wins that have brought the clerks' budgets back into somewhat line of where we ought to be. So, all right, we've got one more button to pass out here. Who knows the answer? Clerks have received 3 separate appropriations of state general revenue funding since coming out of the state budget. What are the 3 separate lines that we have received? Nope, foreclosure was pre. So since 2014, what have we received? Jury is 1. Who can give me the other 2? Ooh.
One was last year.
They're small. They're tiny. Ah, I got Hope Funds. Who said it? And what's the third one? No, not that one. No, so Hope Funds was the second one. The first one is jury. The second one is Hope Funds. What's the third one? Ah, pandemic. Yeah, you have to. We're going to give it to you. Yeah, but yes, the Hope Funds, the pandemic recovery, and the jury funding are the 3 that the legislature has given us over the last 12 years. Until this year, when they give us additional jury and additional reimbursements, right, Clerk Fernandez-Marquez? All right, any questions? Wow, that's real quiet. That's real quiet.
We get back to email.
Hey, look, I do much better on email anyway, so please, if you got anything that you want to email me, please. And that goes for the entire team. We got Lindsay, Matt, Leonard, Griffin. If you have any questions, you can email anybody at CCOC, and if they don't know the answer, they'll get you to the person who does know the answer. So please, and you can email me any time of day. Some of y'all know that I'm up way too late, so doing some work, but the question was if we would email the presentation to the participants. Do we have everybody's email, Lindsay? You have emails for everybody who registered? Perfect. We will send it out then. What do y'all think? Good? Bad? What do we need? What else do we need to do on this type of training? Yeah, the question was, are we posting? So we're going to put this onto the learning management system, CertiClerk, So it's not a video. It'll just be audio because we've been doing.
If the recording works.
Yes.
This is the.
This was a test. This was a test. But as long as the recording worked, then we will post it to the Certi Clerk, and you can download it and listen to it again. Get on there. Go for it. Okay. Absolutely. So the comment was, want more DFS allocation methodology training, and we can definitely do that. Who else? What else do we need to provide you all, especially as it comes to things related to the budget and everything that we do at CCOC? Oh, come on, this is your time. This is your time to shine. Let's go. The projections? Okay, yep. We can definitely work on projections. I tell you what, anybody who wants a revenue projection, email me. jwelty@flccoc.org. Email me if you want a revenue projection, and I will work with Johnny to make sure that we get one for you. Mr. Bailey, on the record, would like a revenue projection. Got it. But yes, I won't be able to remember everyone. So if you email me, we can get you one for sure. So revenue projections, Article 5 audits, what else? What else do we need to give you? What else do you want from us? Come on. Money. Hey, look, did you not see the graphs? Come on now. Come on now. Okay. More information on weighted workload. Okay. All right. What else? And Lindsay is doing a fantastic job on leading those weighted workload work groups. And I think we're going to probably have a couple of different opportunities to push out some additional information about that. So keep your ears peeled for the upcoming months, because we're almost finished. Is that right? We're so close. All right.
I think that's it. 4 minutes back.
How about that?
Thank you so much. So much for all that you do. All the questions. I know I've talked to some of you probably too much for your liking, but thank you to all clerks and staff for the work that you do. Thanks for coming to something like this. And like you said, call us anytime. The budget issues are due on June 1st, so forward to some emails. But thank you again. See you soon.